Chapter 339. The news of the Pope's death shocked the entire Western continent a day later. Regardless of whether it was an ability user or an ordinary person, this was an earth-shattering event. For ability users, it was the death of a fifth-level powerhouse, and for ordinary people, it was the death of the highest leader of one of the three most powerful countries in the West. Our Master Federation, Sky City, the leader of the imaginary agency, Judy Ainaw, was watching the video sent by the country of law. The video speed was reduced by 4 times, but she could still vaguely see 2 gray lines that were like lasers, constantly sweeping through the army of the country of law. Bunkers, tanks, armored vehicles, armed helicopters, power armors, no matter what it was, after encountering the 2 gray lines, they would be directly penetrated and destroyed. The 100,000 Apologetic Legion seemed so vulnerable at this moment. It was only when the 2 gray lines stopped that Judith could see their original strange appearance in the video. Gray exoskeleton-like things, sharp horns on the head, and a thick tail. This was a creature that had never appeared in human history. A new breed of humanoid monster? Judy frowned as she looked at the demon-like non-human creatures on the camera. The assistant next to her said, "The Hall of the Country of Law is currently completely paralyzed, and now Bishop Vardy is temporarily gathering the remaining forces of the Country of Law to continue the battle. The situation in Saint Canonization Province is currently unknown, but it is estimated that millions of people have been killed or injured. And of the 2 gray monsters, one of them has disappeared. The other is still wandering in Saint Canonization Province, and according to witness reports, they seem to have a habit of hunting humans. Bishop Vardy and the others have besieged the gray monster several times, but they all failed. Even nuclear bombs have no effect." Judy listened while reading the information sent by the country of law. When she saw that 30 nuclear bombs were detonated at the same time, but there was no effect at all, her frown deepened. According to the Intelligence Department's estimation, the strength of the 2 monsters is above the 5th level. They also have an unknown ability that can disable nuclear weapons. The assistant on the side then asked, "The request for help from the country of law has been sent to the presidential palace, and His Excellency the President intends to send troops to the country of law. He hopes that you can send an ability user to support the troops within an hour." Of course, Judy knew that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the upper echelons of the Federation to break through the law country. That land had been occupied by countless fanatics for hundreds of years. Even at the peak of the Federation, they could defeat them but could not occupy them. But this time, the Code Country suffered heavy losses. After the death of their only Level 5 ability user, the Pope, they didn't have a single Level 5 ability user. The group of people in the presidential palace obviously wanted to seize this opportunity to completely take over the law country. Even if they couldn't completely occupy it, they had to get the biggest share of the spoils. But looking at the description of the 2 monsters from the Codex country, Judith had a very bad feeling in her heart. Even though the 2 monsters looked like they had wiped out 100,000 papal protectors and killed a 5th-level ability user, they were indeed quite powerful, but they weren't undefeatable. Most of the aides in the presidential palace also believed that if the Knights Templar were still there, these 2 monsters would absolutely not be able to break through the law country. Considering the existence of the Eastern Continent, Xia and Lianping, the Federation planned to send out its own ace-armored troops and unite the ability users of several major families in the country to fight a blitzkrieg battle with the strongest force, taking down both the monsters and the law country in one fell swoop. And what they hoped Judith Ainaw to do was to send out the imaginary organization's Level 5 ability users as the high-end force holding the line. But the original Level 5 ability users of the imaginary organization, Jane, Giant Shield, Vivian, and Lestat, were all killed one after another. Now there were only 2 Level 5 ability users left, namely Woody and Judy Ainaw. Even though they had the Federation's ace troops, as well as the ability users of several major families in the country, their fighting strength far surpassed the law country's 100,000 papal protectors. But if they only sent Woody alone, Judy Einall was still a bit hesitant. Because of the lack of information about the two monsters, she was always a bit worried. But if she also had to go with Woody, then there would be no more level 5 ability users in the Federation. Thinking about Li Anping and the unknown Tyrell, how could she leave the Federation without worry? And after the loss of 4 level 5 ability users in a row, Judy Einall was now scared. So regarding the unknown monsters that appeared in the Law Country this time, she wasn't as optimistic as the people in the Presidential Palace, which was why she felt conflicted about the Presidential Palace's request for support. The assistant on the side saw Judy in a daze and softly reminded her, "Sir, should we inform Sir Woody now?" Judy thought for a bit and asked, "Which families sent people to support this time?" The assistant pointed at the tablet in his hand and said, "The 4 elements, Adams, Flame Wolf, Lannister, and the Able family." "The Able family?" Judy asked. "That Tony Able also went?" His assistant nodded and said, "Yes." Judith had seen this Tony Able once before. He was a prodigy of the Able family who had appeared in the past year. In just a short year, he had reached the 4th rank, and he had an extraordinary influence among the aristocratic families in the country. He was even considered to be the closest to the 5th rank among all the 4th rank ability users in the Federation. Hearing that Tony Able would also go, Judy nodded and said, "Inform Woody, let him report to the Presidential Palace. Also, tell the Falcon and SEAL team to inform me at any time if anything happens. Also, this Tony Able, if possible, let them take care of him appropriately." The assistant nodded to show that he understood. He knew that Judy thought that Tony Able had the potential to reach the level 5 ability rank and thought very highly of him, which was why she wanted the people of the virtual organization to protect him appropriately. He couldn't help but ask, "Then, do we need to let Tony Able stay at the back?" Judy shook her head. "He has a lot of potential, but no matter how much potential a genius has, he still needs to experience life and death battles and be tempered to grow. Just try not to let him die." The assistant nodded and began to operate the tablet in his hand, sending out Judy's orders. A few seconds later, Woody's head lit up on Judy's desk. He was still wearing a cowboy hat and dressed like a cowboy. But his eyes didn't seem as relaxed as usual. "Woody, this time's operation in the Codex state will be handed over to you. Take a look at the information of those 2 monsters, be careful, don't die like Lestat and the others." "Don't worry." Woody grinned, "I still have to come back for my daughter's birthday." Chapter 340. 50 men and women in silver combat uniforms jumped down from the transport plane and landed directly at the location of the 2 demons. The nano-armor on their bodies could help them resist the high temperature, cold, and various explosive impact. It also greatly increased their strength and speed. Phase shift devices and electromagnetic passports could help them resist energy or kinetic attack. The electromagnetic rifles in their hands used 8mm depleted uranium bullets. The initial speed was Mach 5. The effective range was within 5,000 meters. It was able to tear apart the various enemies in front of them in most planetary environments. The beam longsword hanging from their waists could release a laminar arc plasma beam of more than 1.5 meters under standard atmospheric pressure, the temperature reaching up to 20,000 degrees Celsius. The rest of the weapons, such as sound waves, lasers, particles, and radiation, they were armed from head to toe. Not to mention, their hearts were all bound with high-energy explosives. Once their hearts stopped, the resulting explosion was enough to flatten everything within a 100-meter radius. These 50 soldiers were far more powerful than the current generation's military. Not only were they well equipped, each of them also had unique abilities. This was the Federation's trump card, Cobra. When they attacked at the same time, they already had enough power to threaten a fifth energy level Esper. In fact, the reason the Federation created this team was to deal with the fifth energy level Espers that were getting harder and harder to suppress. Although they didn't have the chance to officially fight a fifth energy level Esper to the death, the Federation's upper echelons believed that Cobra's first appearance would definitely be able to achieve outstanding results. 50 battle-hardened and experienced super special forces landed one after another within a few hundred meters of the demons. In the heat, His Highness was still gnawing on new prey. But in the next moment, hundreds of bullets already tore through all obstacles, directly slamming into the two demons with kinetic energy exceeding 2,000 meters per second. The reinforced concrete at this moment was as fragile as tofu. Hundreds, then thousands, tens of thousands of depleted uranium bullets with electromagnetic acceleration covered the location of the two demons. This was like an attack signal. The moment the electromagnetic rifles fired, all kinds of sound waves, lasers, explosives, and sniper weapons were all aimed at the location of the two demons. At the same time, various long-range abilities such as weakening, slowing, hallucinating, dizziness, and high-energy rays were activated at the same time, acting on the two demons together. In less than 1,000th of a second, the floor of the building was torn apart. Fabrizio's body was still the original human body. Although this body had been strengthened by him and was far beyond the scope of a human, it was still vulnerable under such a terrifying attack. It was riddled with holes and turned into thousands of powder drifting in the air. If Fabrizio was in such a state, then what would happen to His Highness, who was regarded as the main enemy, if he was attacked in such a manner? He was completely unharmed. Whether it was the depleted uranium bomb that tore through reinforced concrete like a piece of paper, or the concentrated sonic pulse that could destroy a battleship in an instant, or the high-energy laser that could easily cut through titanium alloy. This round of attacks did not leave a single mark on His Highness' body. A cool breeze blew past Her Highness' body. Other than the surrounding buildings that had been completely turned into dust, Her Highness was the only one who did not change at all. She was still standing in midair. No, it wasn't that there weren't any changes. At least during the attack just now, Her Highness closed her eyes. Did this mean that during the attack just now, her eyes were her weakness? Her Highness, who closed his eyes during the attack just now, only felt anger, rage. Although he was unwilling to admit it, the food in front of him did have a slight possibility of hurting him. It was this irrefutable reason that made him feel a kind of shame and rage from the bottom of his heart. However, the 4 Cobra members who rushed up with beam swords did not have the time to care about this point. Because they were wearing nano-armor, they jumped continuously like flying men. After reaching the back of the building that was dozens of meters high, they rushed towards Her Highness. Before they even got close, they already felt a kind of violent killing intent. And this violent killing intent, which was like a tsunami hundreds of meters high, came from Her Highness in front of them. Previously in the human world, no matter what kind of enemy she faced, Her Highness always used ordinary fists and feet to easily deal with them. But this did not mean that the race she belonged to only knew how to use fists and feet based on instinct. It was just that when facing the food on the table, Her Highness had never thought of using any real violent means. But now, the anger coming from her chest had made her understand that if she did not use some force to deal with the food in front of her, she would accidentally prick her hand. The demon race, which had dominated the multiverse for countless years and had a history of tens of thousands of years, had never lacked real effective combat skills. Whether it was fighting skills, energy manipulation methods, or the application of natural elements, the demon race's means were so many and profound that it was enough to make the human race, which had only developed for a few thousand years, ashamed to the point of suicide. Her Highness raised her right hand slightly. The power from her talent ability directly turned the soaring anger into a flame in an instant. The dark red flame directly wrapped around Her Highness' fist. The violent flame had not yet spread, but the high temperature had already directly melted the 4 Cobra members who were close to her. They did not scream or resist. In front of this sun-like temperature, they were like moths to a flame, instantly turning into ashes. And this was just the preparatory work before Her Highness attacked. The super-high temperature flames gathered on her right fist. The surrounding air molecules turned into a cloud of plasma under this astonishingly high temperature, emitting a light that surpassed that of the sun. Deviant martial style, heavenly fire descent following Her Highness' punch, the terrifying plasma fire cloud flew toward the place where the Cobra members were the most concentrated. Terrifying white light soared into the sky, enveloping everything within the light. The shock wave from the explosion turned everything in its path into ashes. The black sniper from earlier stood on a building a few kilometers away, watching in a daze as a huge fireball completely enveloped the place where Her Highness had been. A crazy roar rang out from his earpiece, "Retreat! Everyone, retreat! Damn it! How many people are still alive?" However, he could no longer hear it. As a series of loud sounds entered his ears, the shock wave had already arrived before him. In the next second, the black sniper had just turned around when his entire body flew into the air. It was as if he had been crushed by a battleship, turning into a pool of flesh and blood. In the battle command room, everyone, including Woody, stared blankly at the image transmitted by the satellite. The area within 5 kilometers of where the battle had taken place had been completely razed to the ground. 5 kilometers away, the entire city had been engulfed in a sea of fire. In the entire city, 1 million people would die in the following fires, explosions, suffocation, and other disasters. A few minutes later, when the smoke and dust had gradually dispersed, the satellite lens continued to zoom in and Her Highness' appearance appeared before everyone once again. Her appearance was still the same as before. There seemed to be no changes at all. Or perhaps it was because her appearance was different from that of ordinary people, so they could not tell the difference. But no matter which possibility it was, it made the hearts of everyone present sink even more. What the few people present did not notice was that although Fabrizio was only left with a little bit of flesh and blood, he was still rapidly regenerating in the air, trying his best to recover. They had only launched a probing attack to gather information, but the enemy had retaliated by destroying the city. Woody sighed, "Although we sacrificed 50 Cobra members and a city, we at least eliminated one enemy. We also know that the enemy belongs to people like Lady, Juron, and Vivian, who have the ability to cause wide-area destruction. Based on our initial estimation, its ability should be related to heat." At the conference table, a middle-aged man immediately stood up and said, "Even a level 5 ability user would not be able to use such an attack without consuming any energy. This monster obviously lacks a certain level of intelligence, so he used such an attack so easily. I think this is a good opportunity for us. We can immediately send people to attack him before he recovers." When the middle-aged man finished speaking, everyone present immediately fell silent. Woody turned his head and looked around, but no one dared to look him in the eyes. Obviously, no one wanted to be the next wave of attack. After all, the enemy was a monster who had destroyed an entire city with a single attack. According to common sense, even a level 5 ability user would not be able to use such an attack continuously. However, one could never be too careful. If the enemy attacked again, wouldn't they be courting death if they went over now? Although no one wanted to die, Woody knew that this kind of thing had to be done. However, in order to prevent the enemy from continuing to use such attacks, they had to carefully choose the people to attack. They couldn't have too many people, and it would be best if they had outstanding life-saving abilities. After getting close to the enemy, they would be able to deal with the monster and test whether the enemy could use similar attacks again. "Do you need me to do it personally?" Woody thought for a moment and swept his gaze over the few people present. Suddenly, his gaze paused as he looked at a young man in the room. It was Tony Abel, whom Judith Ayner had instructed the imaginary number service to take care of. However, at this moment, Tony Abel's head was lowered and he was twitching. He looked like he was dozing off. Beside him was a beautiful girl who looked less than 20 years old. When she saw Woody's gaze stop on her brother, she immediately shook Tony Abel's arm nervously. "Brother, wake up." Following her and Woody's actions, everyone's gaze landed on Tony Abel. Woody asked unhappily, "Tony, do you have any opinions about the next battle plan?" Chapter 341. When he heard Woody's question, Tony finally raised his head. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he did not panic at all. After giving it some thought, he said slowly, "I think that what we do now is not important. What's important is what they do." Tony stood up and came in front of the big screen. He pointed at His Highness in the image and said, "Everyone, the monster we've encountered now isn't an ordinary lion or tiger. Not only does it have powerful strength, but it also has its own wisdom. It's just like how we tried to clean up the scene and evacuate the innocent civilians, but they immediately changed their course of action." He looked around at the representatives from the various families and the government, as well as Woody, who was sitting on the main seat, and said calmly, "So, gentlemen, do you think that they will still stay where they are after this attack and let us think of ways to deal with them? Will they retreat and hide, or will they continue to head south? From the different choices they make, we'll be able to see their true strength." Seeing how Tony Abel was speaking so confidently in front of the upper echelons, the eyes of his younger sister, who was sitting next to him earlier, were filled with splendor. Tony's current confidence, wisdom, and power were completely different from how he was a year ago. Brother looks so handsome now. In fact, it was impossible for anyone not to become stronger after receiving constant guidance from Li Anping's mental qi incarnation. This year of hellish training, not only did it raise Tony's ability to the 4th level, it also raised his confidence, willpower, calmness, courage, and other mental attributes by a lot. This was also the confidence that came from having power. After witnessing the power of the monster in his body countless times, Tony was able to remain calm no matter what kind of opponent he faced. This was because he believed that no matter how strong the opponent was, they would not be stronger than the super monster in his body. Tony's words calmed everyone down. The logic behind his words was very simple. If the opponent had indeed entered a weakened state after unleashing such terrifying destructive power, then they would definitely find a place to hide and rest. However, if the other party continued to head south like before, it would naturally mean that the attack just now wasn't his limit. This was a very simple logic, but because the power displayed by the opponent was too shocking, most of the people present had lost their calm. Either they wanted to hole up and not come out, or they wanted to go all out. At this moment, as if to support Tony Abel's explanation, a staff member shouted, "They're moving again. 2 targets are moving towards the south at high speed." "What? 2? None of them died." A crackling sound was heard. His Highness' tail whipped the air, and a whirlwind shot out, directly rolling up the sand on the ground. There was no longer any trace of anger on his face. Instead, there was a hint of impatience. He glanced at the pile of minced meat beside him and said indifferently, "Fabrizio, the body you're parasitizing is too weak." As the pieces of Fabrizio's body slowly pieced together, a black gas slowly drilled out of his body. Then, it reformed on the outside, turning into a monster with a bull's head and horse's hooves. "Your Highness, it's done. I've transformed into my original form," Fabrizio said weakly. The white body under his feet was the body he had parasitized in order to blend into the human world. However, it was completely destroyed by the attacks from the humans and His Highness. This greatly damaged his vitality, and his strength had decreased by 30%. Especially after His Highness' heavenly fire descent. The attacks from the humans were very powerful, but at most it would waste some energy to regenerate. However, His Highness's descent of the fire cloud directly destroyed my body's structure from its foundation. That level of high temperature, thinking of this, his heart was filled with fear. He looked at His Highness in front of him and couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, your strength has reached the 7th energy rank?" Hearing Febrizo's question, His Highness showed a proud smile on his face. "That's right. I got some good stuff in the previous world, and now my strength has reached the 7th energy rank. However, no one knows about it now." He sneered and glanced at Febrizo. Then, he said indifferently, "I'm thinking of giving Big Brother a big surprise when I go back this time." Febrizo lowered his head. His heart was already in turmoil. He didn't expect that Prince Hygram, who was rumored to only be at the 6th energy rank, had secretly reached the 7th energy rank. Before he could think clearly about the series of effects this would bring, Hygram had already flicked his tail impatiently and said, "Have you rested enough? If you have, then let's go." He turned his eyes to the south, where the Federation was. "Next, we'll go directly to another country." Febrizo asked cautiously, "Your Highness, what do you mean?" "This time, we won't eat them casually." Hygram licked his lips and said, "This time, we'll take over the strongest country on this planet and make them provide us with food. At the same time, we'll borrow their strength to help us find Black's existence." He flicked his tail again. The tail, which was as thick as a Tyrannosaurus rex, lashed out in the air, producing crisp, crackling sounds. "If we let these little bugs continue to attack, I'm afraid that when I fight back, I'll accidentally wipe out all the humans on this planet." Febrizo gulped. He knew that there was no exaggeration in Hygram's words. Facing the power of a 7th energy rank, let alone a weak race like humans, even he had suffered great damage from the prince's attack earlier. Thinking of this, he immediately bowed and said, "Your Highness, in my memory, the strongest human country should be in the south. With our flying speed, even if we're a little slower, we should be able to reach it in just over 10 minutes. Is that so?" Hygram leaped lightly, and his body was already in midair. "Then let's go. I hope there'll be more delicious food over there." Accompanied by a series of sonic booms, 2 black silhouettes cut across the sky. They were like 2 supersonic fighter jets, flying toward the Federation's border. Wherever they passed by, the clouds in the sky were split into 2 by the huge wind pressure. New Dongyang in a valley. Lianping was seated cross-legged on the ground. However, his silhouette seemed a little special. It was like a lump of fog, seeming as if it wanted to disperse and also wanted to gather. It gave off an extremely unstable feeling. In his body, each of the atoms that formed his physical body was agitated due to the changes in electromagnetic forces. Waves of powers that could bring about terrifying calamities kept on gushing out. Next to Lianping, the plants started to turn yellow. As the powers in Lianping's body changed, they were disintegrated into countless atoms with a bang. They were completely destroyed, and not a single trace of them remained. Lianping opened his eyes and looked toward his right hand. The vibrations that were hard to discern with the naked eye were changing along with the changes in the magnetic field. His right hand was emitting a terrifying aura of destruction. Under the effects of electromagnetic forces, the countless atoms slowly gathered together an unprecedented power. If I activate my physical body through electromagnetic forces, the performance of my strength will probably increase by several times. In terms of speed, I can use another method to activate it. However, I'm still unable to do that for now. However, this consumes a lot of energy. Furthermore, I'm still unable to control the electromagnetic force output of my entire body. Even so, the current me is already far more powerful than my will incarnation. After all, the will incarnation doesn't have a physical body. While it lacks many of its weaknesses, it also lacks many of the unique advantages of the physical body. At the thought of this, Li Anping gained some understanding of the advancement to the 6th energy level. If I were to follow He Yuan's advancement path, the 6th energy level is clearly the path of the material world's pure physical body. This means that when the time comes, the will incarnation will probably still have to return to the physical body, combining the spirit, physical body, and will into one. At the thought of this, Li Anping closed his eyes once again. With a boom, all the animals and plants within a range of several hundred meters were disintegrated into their atomic states due to the changes in the magnetic field in his body. I need time. I need more energy. Just then, Tony Abel saw the video of Higram and Fabrizio in the meeting room. This meant that the will incarnation had also seen this video. Naturally, Li Anping could also see this video. When he saw Higram's super high-temperature plasma created with a single punch, raising everything within a range of 5 kilometers to the ground and dragging the entire city into a sea of flames, he frowned. He could not help but frown. The strength displayed by the other party was no longer below that of his will incarnation. This was especially true for that kind of wide-area destructive power. If they were to fight, it would probably cause great damage to the western mainland, especially when he saw Higram and Fabrizio flying toward the Federation's location. A hint of disgust appeared in Li Anping's eyes. In his eyes, regardless of whether it was the western mainland or the eastern mainland, they would all be under his rule. How could he allow others to destroy them? If I let myself go and fight, the impact would be too bad. At the thought of this, Li Anping directly controlled the Queen of Heaven's clone in Zhongdu and made a call to Jingguang and the others. Is this Yanbei? I want you, Jingguang, and Xia Likong to go to the following address. After giving his orders, Li Anping began to give orders to Tony Abel through his will incarnation. From now on, do as I say. Chapter 342. In the conference room, under the constant tracking of the satellite, the location of Higram and Fabrizio was directly displayed on the map on the big screen. They were like two arrows, constantly approaching the Confederation. What's going on? They're heading towards the Confederation? The reinforcements sent by the Morris and Bayard countries were all wiped out by them a minute ago. At this speed, I'm afraid they'll enter the Confederation's territory in 10 minutes. Seeing the two small dots on the screen flying towards the Confederation at an astonishing speed, the people in the room were all anxious, especially the representatives of the 4 elements. It should be known that their families were located in the northern part of the Confederation, which was where Higram and Fabrizio were heading towards. During this time, Tony Abel didn't say anything, as if he was listening to something. A few minutes later, Woody shouted, "Everyone, calm down. Is this the time to panic?" Tony Abel then said, "Sir, once they enter the Confederation, the losses they'll cause will be unimaginable. We should hurry over immediately." A noble child said, "That's easy for you to say. They're so fast, there's no way we can catch up." "I can take care of this," Tony said calmly. Tony said indifferently, "The problem is who will stop them. Everyone has seen the other party's strength just now. Ordinary attacks are useless. Even high-energy lasers and electromagnetic cannons can't hurt them. Although there are many experts here, I'm afraid that only I, Lord Woody, Carmen of the 4 Elementalists, and Lord Brian of the Flaming Wolves can cause any damage to these 2 monsters." Carmen, who was mentioned by Tony, was a strong representative of the wind element family. He looked to be around 25 years old, but his hair was dyed purple, and he wore smoky makeup and earrings. Brian was a middle-aged man around 40 years old. He wore glasses, a shirt, and a small vest. He was the head of the Flaming Wolf family. Of the 3 people Tony mentioned, Woody was a level 5 ability user, while Carmen and Brian were well-known figures in the Confederation. Their abilities were even more familiar to everyone. That was why Tony said that these three people could cause damage to Higram. When the two of them heard Tony mention them, they subconsciously looked at him. As for the others, there might be ability users that he didn't know about who also had the ability to cause harm to Higram, but since they were hiding their abilities, if they stood out now, they would need to verify their abilities. However, Tony and the others obviously didn't have the time for that. As soon as Tony finished speaking, a few nobles objected. The other three are fine, but do you have any way of harming that monster? Tony Abel, I remember that the Abel family's ability is the absolute black domain. It's not an offensive ability, right? Don't listen to such childish fantasies. What we should do now is to count the abilities of everyone here and our subordinates. According to the information we collected before, we should rearrange a crusade team. We need to inform the domestic army to prepare for battle. We can't let them enter an uninhabited land. Looking at the group of nobles and bureaucrats in front of him, Tony Abel showed a disdainful smile on his face. He directly looked at Woody and said, "Sir, let's go now. If we delay any longer, I'm afraid that the other party will cause even more damage." When the few officials saw Tony's expression, they began to clamor again. However, Woody didn't care about them. Instead, he looked at Tony with interest and said, "If it's really as you said, and you can send us over, I don't have a problem with that." Standing next to Woody, the captain of the Confederation's virtual machines Falcon Squad frowned and said, "Sir, it's fine." Tony's little sister pulled on his sleeve from behind. "Brother, are you really going to deal with that monster?" Feeling his little sister's worry and reluctance, Tony smiled bitterly in his heart. Of course, he didn't want to go, but the monster in his body kept urging him, so he had no choice but to go. "It's fine. Just wait for me here." Tony patted his little sister's head. The latter revealed a shy smile and lowered her head. Woody said to Carmen and Brian, "The two of you, let's go and meet these two monsters together. If we can't stop them, the Confederation's losses will be incalculable. Countless citizens will die. However, the two of you know how strong the opponent is this time. If you don't want to die, I won't force you." Carmen, who looked like the lead singer of a rock band, smiled and stood up to stretch. "Count me in." On the other side, Brian pushed up his glasses and said, "As an ability user and a noble of the Confederation, it's naturally my duty to do this." At the side, the people who were against Woody's decision to listen to Tony's suggestion no longer objected. Firstly, Woody, who was the strongest and had the most authority, had already agreed to Tony's plan. Secondly, regardless of whether they succeeded or not, Carmen and Brian's fearless temperament was worthy of their respect. It should be known that after seeing Hygrim's attack that destroyed the city, most of the people present had already retreated. Under such circumstances, Carmen and Brian were still willing to stand up and stop the enemy at the first opportunity. Clearly, they had displayed a spirit that was worthy of respect from everyone present. Woody nodded and asked Tony, "All right, now how are you going to send us over?" Tony stretched out his hands and smiled. "The three of you, please hold on to my body. I'll fly you over." Woody was puzzled. "Let's not talk about whether you have the ability to fly or not. Are you sure you can maintain a high speed after carrying the three of us? Are you sure you can catch up to the speed of those two monsters?" Although he said that, Woody still stretched out his hand and grabbed Tony's hand. On the other side, Carmen and Brian also grabbed onto Tony's arm at the same time. Hearing Woody's question, Tony smiled bitterly. Faced with Hygrim's attack, Liamping clearly didn't care whether or not his identity as a psychic clone was exposed. Just as Woody, Carmen, and Brian grabbed onto Tony, an invisible force had already enveloped their bodies completely. It was the nihility force field released by the psychic clone. In the next moment, under the force field's envelopment, Tony and the other three soared into the sky, flying toward Hygrim's location. "It feels as if we're being dragged forward by an invisible hand," Woody thought as he looked at the ground that flew past him rapidly. Just then, Tony's voice rang out beside their ears. It was a voice transmitted through the nihility force field. After all, their flying speed was getting faster and faster. It was obviously unrealistic to rely on air transmission to communicate. Sir Woody, I only know that your ability is to transform. Since we're going to fight in a while, can you let me know more about your ability? You've even found out about my ability? You've really made ample preparations. Woody glanced at Tony and said frankly, "Of course, that's not a problem. My ability is indeed to transform. I have a total of 6 forms. I specialize in scouting, defense, attack, speed, concealment, and my final form, which is also my strongest form. However, my transformations are random. Which form I want to transform into each time depends on my luck." Hearing that Woody's ability was actually like this, the other 3 revealed curious expressions. It was obvious that this was the first time they had heard this famous level 5 ability user from the Federation introduce his own ability. Tony continued to ask, "Can you explain the conditions for your transformation? And your strongest form? Can it be comparable to those 2 monsters? Every time I transform, I'll randomly choose one of the 6 forms. Each transformation lasted for 3 minutes. Only when the duration was over could the next transformation be carried out. As for my strongest form, I won't lose to those 2 monsters for at least 3 minutes. At this point, Woody suddenly realized something. Since when did this kid take the initiative? At this moment, Tony had already nodded and asked Carmen and Brian, who were at the side. "The 2 of you, although I've heard about your abilities, can I ask about the specific data?" Carmen shrugged. "Of course." Brian also said, "I'm fine with it too. Ask whatever you want." Chapter 343. On a rocky desert, Tony, Woody, Carmen, and Brian were standing together. Over 60 kilometers behind them was a city. Right now, the 2 silhouettes in the sky were flying toward the city at an extremely fast speed. If no one stopped them, they would undoubtedly enter the big city that belonged to the Federation behind Tony and the others. No one knew what these 2 man-eating monsters would do after entering the city. Looking at the 2 silhouettes getting closer and closer, Tony said, "The 3 of you, their destructive prowess is too strong. We can't continue probing their abilities and data. That would cause too great of a loss. Therefore, we must get rid of them in one go." Earlier on, the psychic energy clone had used the void force field to drag the 3 of them along at supersonic speed. It was as if they were in an airplane. Not only did they maintain a high speed, but they also did not hurt the 3 of them. This ability had clearly won the respect of the other 3 people present. When they heard Tony's words, they all nodded in agreement. However, just then, a hint of struggle flashed in Tony's eyes. In the next moment, his body trembled and was completely taken over by the psychic energy clone. A voice that was even colder than Tony's rang out, "Next, I'll drag the 2 of them down from the sky. Carmen and Brian, aim at them and attack with all your might. As for Sir Brian, please transform first. We'll decide on the next plan based on your transformed form." Although the psychic energy clone had tried its best to imitate Tony's voice by vibrating the air, there were still some slight differences in the tone and intonation. Why does this guy sound like a completely different person? However, with the battle imminent, Brian was not in a hurry to ask about this. What he did not know was that when he heard Tony's voice earlier, he subconsciously felt that there was no room for doubt. He subconsciously listened to Tony's orders. Woody only said, "All right, then I'll transform first." This was something that the 4 of them had discussed on their way here. According to the differences in Woody's 6 forms, they had decided on 6 different attack combinations. He opened his palm, and as his psychic energy gushed out, a die appeared in his hand with a bang. The 6 sides of the die were not numbers. Instead, they were lightning, telescope, shield, hammer, grass, and the word God. Then, Woody threw the sieve with all his might. On the sieve was the image of a hammer. Seeing the hammer symbol, Woody shrugged. It is an attack form. Later, we will attack together. However, Woody glanced at Tony. Are you sure you can go up alone and drag them down? Just as Woody asked this question, there was a loud bang and white smoke swept through his body. In the next moment, his body had turned into a small giant that was more than 3 meters tall with bulging muscles. In his hand was a huge hammer that was more than 3 meters long, and the head of the hammer was almost as long as the torso of a normal person. Looking at the transformed Woody, Tony said calmly, "You guys attack with all your might. If necessary, you can attack me as well." He turned his head and looked at the 2 monsters in the sky. They were less than a kilometer away from the 4 of them. In a few seconds they would fly over their heads. Tony, liamping, stretched out his hand and said slowly, "Then, let me say hello first." There was a loud boom. He struck out with his palm, and a white shock wave surged toward the 2 monsters. In the next moment, the shock wave completely covered the 2 of them. At the same time, Tony's, liamping, feet trembled slightly, and his entire body flew out along with the shockwave. He didn't rely on the reaction force of the Earth at all, but purely on the push of the nihility force field. In an instant, he arrived behind Fabrizio. Fabrizio had just been covered by the shockwave, but he was still holding his head with both hands, blocking the attack. At this moment, Tony, liamping, had already stretched out his palm and gently pressed it against the back of Fabrizio's head. His shoulder and arm didn't move at all. He only used his palm to lightly pat Fabrizio's head. Accompanied by a loud bang, Fabrizio flew towards the ground like a meteor, as if he had been hit by a heavy blow. "I'll go first." The moment he said that, Woody had already jumped and rushed toward the falling Fabrizio. His muscles, which had expanded like a bomb after his transformation, doubled in size at this moment. The huge hammer in his hand was already swinging toward the falling Fabrizio. There was a loud boom. Fabrizio, who was hit hard again, burst into black smoke all over his body. He tried to move his hands and feet as if he was trying to stop himself. However, Woody's sledgehammer was not just a brute force. No matter how strong or how strange the ability of the target was, the target would have to use their own body to withstand the attack. They could not use any means to defend themselves. Moreover, no matter what the result of the attack was, the target would fall to the ground. There was another loud bang, and Fabrizio was smashed to the ground. At the same time, Carmen and Brian also activated their abilities and rushed forward. Carmen's psychic energy wrapped around his right hand like a sword and slashed toward Fabrizio's waist. That was their family's bloodline ability. No matter how hard the object was, it would be cut in half by the psychic energy sword in his hand. At the same time, Brian's psychic energy scattered all over the ground. Every cloud of psychic energy turned into green flames in the next moment. Then, wolves of flames drilled out of the flames. These wolves of flames pounced on the fallen Fabrizio under Brian's command. These wolves of flames would turn into green flames and burn the target they attacked. The target's body would not be harmed, but their spirit and sea of consciousness would be severely damaged. The green flames would continuously burn the target's consciousness until the target's consciousness collapsed and died. After being attacked by 3 people in succession, Fabrizio's body was cut into 6 pieces. As the green flames burned, the black smoke around his body shook violently, and he kept screaming. He felt as if his soul was being burned. In the meeting room, everyone was staring at the satellite image and the image sent by the observation team. When they saw Fabrizio's miserable state, they all shouted excitedly, "Good job! We've taken care of one. We just need to kill one more." However, unlike the excited faces of the people in the conference room, Tony, liamping, revealed a shocked expression as he looked at Higram. His fist was only over 10 centimeters away from Hygram's head, but it was blocked by Hygram's palm and could not move forward. This was the first time Tony had seen someone who could block the fist of the monster in his body head-on. Higram took a deep breath and revealed a puzzled expression. "There's a familiar smell on your body." With a cold snort, Tony Lianping kicked Higram's stomach with his right leg. This time, Higram had no intention of blocking and allowed the huge force to hit his stomach. However, the result of this kick was that Higram was unharmed, while Tony's face revealed a hint of pain. "This guy's body is so hard." Lianping was once again surprised by Higram's abilities. His psychic clone had used 70% of his strength in this kick. Not only was the demon before him unharmed, his body's position did not even change at all. Instead, it was Tony who could not withstand this force, and his right leg was fractured. "Tony's body is too weak. This can't go on." With this kick between Tony's right leg and Higram's stomach, a strong gust of wind blew out in all directions. Even the clouds in the sky were swept up by this kick. It could be seen that Tony Lianping had used a lot of strength in that kick. However, Higram acted as if he hadn't been attacked at all. One of his hands was still tightly gripping Tony's Lianping's left fist. He said calmly, "Your strength is not bad. Among humans you should be the strongest." Tony Lianping did not say anything. He only used his spiritual energy field to scan the other party's body structure. However, when he looked at it with his naked eye, the other party's body structure was a layer of gray skin. However, when he used his spiritual energy field, which could observe molecules, atoms, and even electrons, the other party's body was still that layer of gray matter. Regardless of whether it was inside or outside the body, there was no difference at all from what he could see with his naked eye. What kind of structure is this thing? This density. Just as Tony Lianping was feeling surprised, Higram licked his lips and revealed a greedy expression. "Since you're the strongest among humans, then you should also be the most delicious one." Just as the other party finished speaking, Lianping had already felt the other party's terrifying killing intent. Making a prompt decision, Tony Lianping directly swung out his right palm. With a poochie sound, the hand blade directly cut off Tony's right palm along with his entire palm. Allowing his fist to be caught in the other party's palm, Lianping's entire body had already retreated rapidly. It was only a few tenths of a second before Tony retreated. Higram's mouth had already bitten down on Tony's head. His two rows of teeth collided with each other, producing a loud clang. It sounded like tens of thousands of tons of containers crashing together. Tony, whose palm had been chopped off, could not help but cry out in agony. His face was contorted as he stared at Higram. "Hey, what's up with this monster? Even you can't beat him?" "Shut up. He's very strong. He's probably on par with me in terms of strength," Lianping said solemnly. In this world, he was probably the only one who knew what it meant to be on par with him in terms of strength. If he could not borrow Carmen's, Brian's, and Yenbei's abilities to destroy the other party, the consequences would be unimaginable once he used his psychic energy clone to fight with the other party at full power. "I can't use Tony's body anymore. Even with the help of the spiritual force field, it won't be long before his body is killed. And that strange body structure. No wonder all the previous attacks were ineffective. There's no other way. I can only use my psychic energy clone to fight with him." Just as Lianping was thinking this, Tony screamed again. This was because Higram had actually swallowed his chopped-off palm in one bite. What was Tony thinking when he saw his palm being eaten just like that? Higram chewed a few mouthfuls of Tony's palm. His expression immediately changed, but he still swallowed it. "What's going on? It doesn't taste better than the Pope?" At this moment, new changes occurred under Tony's Lianping's feet. Fabrizio, who had been cut into 6 pieces, suddenly expanded and multiplied, becoming 6 Fabrizios of the original size. Each of them was burning with green flames like 6 huge fireballs. As they screamed in pain, they charged towards the three people on the ground. Li Anping observed this situation through his psychic energy clone. Although he was slightly distracted, Tony's body and vision did not change at all. But even so, Higram still instantly flashed behind him. "You seem to be distracted?" At the next moment, a force that was as heavy as Mount Tai smashed down onto Tony's back. Relying on the protection of the nothingness force field, Tony did not die immediately. However, his entire body still crashed into the ground instantly. Then, amidst a series of tremors, Tony penetrated through several thousand meters of the ground's rock stratum. A wave-like tremor spread out in all directions from where Tony had crashed into the ground. The soldiers who were filming and observing this battle from several kilometers away only felt the ground shaking violently. All of them could no longer maintain their balance and fell to the ground. In the city 60 kilometers away, due to the lack of time, there was no time to evacuate. All the citizens in the city continued with their lives as usual. However, in the next moment, as the violent tremors spread here, a local earthquake occurred. Chapter 344. Li Anping's fists bombarded Higram one after another. Molecules, atoms, electrons, and all the particles in the surroundings shot out in all directions under Li Anping's fist. They collided with each other, tore apart, and released a huge amount of energy. This was a fist that almost ignited the entire sky. All the so-called explosions and flames in human history became a joke in front of him. The terrifying heat, the blazing energy, and the intense light radiation had already enveloped both Higram and the psychic incarnation at the same time. This was already a battle that was completely impossible for humans to observe. And the explosion that caused this terrible disaster, which was enough to destroy the entire Tianjing in an instant, was just the result of a full-powered psychic incarnation's punch. Similar atomic bursting fists had already been blasted towards Higram one after another before the explosion ended. And in the face of such an earth-shattering attack, how could Higram let his opponent do anything? At this time, because he couldn't speak, the surging will directly turned into electromagnetic waves, and then transmitted to the psychic incarnation's body. The information that was transmitted almost at the speed of light was instantly analyzed by the psychic incarnation. This was how they communicated during battle. "If this is your full strength, then go to hell." Before Black went into hibernation, he had never taught Li Anping about psychic energy. He even deliberately hid the demon race's understanding of psychic energy from them in order to limit Li Anping's growth, and also to prepare himself for controlling the psychic incarnation in the future. And now, Higram naturally didn't have such concerns. Anger was his best nourishment. This time, he didn't turn it into flames. Instead, he turned the anger in his heart into boundless brute force and a unique red psychic energy. That was the special psychic energy developed by Higram's race according to their talents for battle, the psychic energy of wrath. Regardless of whether it was strength, speed, destructive power, defensive power, or other attributes needed for battle, it had an almost perfect amplification. Like a volcano that suddenly erupted, the moment the psychic energy of wrath appeared from Higram's body, all the surrounding particles were completely pushed away by a tyrannical force, forming a layer of almost vacuum space around him. That was the unique attribute of the psychic energy of wrath, almost repelling some non-user matter and power. Regardless of whether it was the explosion or the high temperature, they were all far away from him at this moment. Under the cover of the angry intent, Higram had also turned completely red. Every muscle, fiber, and cell in his body, under extreme compression, had a density and hardness that far surpassed any material Li Anping had ever seen. With this shocking density and hardness, coupled with the crazy amplification of the angry intent and the brute force that was comparable to the psychic energy incarnation, even before the punch was thrown, it already gave off the illusion of spacetime being distorted and gravity being reversed. deviant martial style, Tianba thunderbolt strike. He had displayed pure power to the extreme. It was a combat technique that Hygrim's clan had passed down through countless years of constant tempering. This moment was vividly displayed by Hygrim. The turbulent atmosphere seemed to have been frozen by this punch. With this punch, it was as if Hygrim had smashed a continental plate toward the psychic energy incarnation before him. Li Anping's atomic bursting fist was going to smash a hole in the sky before him. The fists collided, and it was as if everything in the world was starting to collapse. The terrifying loud sound was like thunder in the sky. No, it was a sound of destruction that was even more terrifying than thunder. It rang out through the entire Federation and a part of the legal state. Just the loud sound produced by the collision of the fists was enough to kill any living creatures that got close. When the two gushes of power that could similarly destroy the world collided, all the air molecules within a range of 10 kilometers around the psychic energy incarnation and Hygrim were completely expelled, forming a near-vacuum zone. Under such a situation, even if Li Anping had the spiritual force field, he was no longer able to mobilize the atoms in the surroundings to react. This was because there was already nothing in the surroundings. As the situation continued, Hygrim's brute force grew stronger and stronger under the infusion of endless fury. The angry intent on his body had already surged to several hundred meters away. Finally, with a crisp bang, the psychic energy incarnation's hands suddenly shattered, turning into countless black gases and dissipating into the air. Of course, Hygrim would not let go of this rare opportunity. His fists, which were burning with angry intent, moved forward. The Tianba thunderbolt strike was like several hundred Mount Fuji, smashing fiercely into the psychic energy incarnation's chest. There was no air, nor was there any sound. However, amidst this silent collision, a large amount of black psychic energy incarnation's chest emerged. Under this attack that was like a collision between heaven and earth, the psychic energy incarnation was sent flying, turning into a black line and flying toward the north. Hygrim, who was still in his original spot, let out a wild roar. His fury had increased once again with the battle. Both his physical strength and the angry intent on the surface of his body seemed to be increasing with each passing second. Trying to escape, the violent killing intent that was enough to fill up the entire atmosphere turned into electromagnetic waves at the speed of light, catching up to the psychic energy incarnation in an instant. Too late. With just a dash, Hygrim's main body had already created a vacuum corridor. Everything in his path was completely expelled by the angry intent on Hygrim's body. Following this sentence, flames appeared on Hygrim's hands, which had been transformed from his fury. The blazing flames were like two whirlwinds, wrapping tightly around Hygrim's wrists. Abnormal martial style, solar wind in the next moment, the burning flames, together with the angry intent, turned the entire sky into an oven with a temperature of several 10,000 degrees Celsius. The white corridor of high temperature spanned a distance of over 1,000 kilometers. It was like a dazzling aurora, enveloping the sky above both the Federation and the Code Country. Although the solar wind's temperature was not as high as that of fiery cloud descent, its range of destruction far surpassed that of fiery cloud descent. With the appearance of this technique, the average temperature of the western land increased rapidly. It was as if everyone had suddenly arrived at the hottest summer, and they all looked toward the corridor of light in the sky in disbelief. However, how could a mere temperature of several 10,000 degrees Celsius do anything to the current psychic energy incarnation? The psychic energy incarnation, which was surrounded by high temperatures, was completely unharmed. His basic control over particles caused the temperature in his surroundings to not show any signs of increasing. His chest and hands had also recovered from the condensation of psychic energy. High temperatures have no effect? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Hygrim saw the psychic energy incarnation tap his fingertips lightly, and 12 consecutive high-energy laser beams shot out toward where he was, drowning his entire body in an endless sea of light. However, Higram, who was facing this attack, seemed to be sunbathing. The laser beams were unable to even leave a single wound on his skin. On the contrary, the angry intent on his body continued to surge, finally breaking through 1,000 meters. He was like a red shooting star, once again charging toward the psychic energy incarnation with a long trail of flames behind him. Too weak, the two of them once again engaged in close combat. However, the psychic energy incarnation's strength was now completely overshadowed by the other party, and Higram continued to pursue him in the sky. Regardless of whether it was the psychic energy or the psychic energy incarnation's brute force, or the surrounding elements, they were all continuously suppressed and repelled by the power of the angry intent. Wherever Higram passed by, it seemed that only he and his power could exist. Everything else would be crushed by this pure violence. Too weak. Black. You're simply too weak. Accompanied by Higram's taunts, the psychic energy incarnation and the two of them were like two stars in the sky, continuously exchanging blows in the sky above the Federation and the Code State, triggering a series of flames, explosions, and flashes of light. Even though the two of them had already restrained themselves from unleashing their destructive powers onto the ground, the intense changes in the magnetic field still caused earthquakes and volcanic eruptions in certain areas. In the fighter jet, Judy M. looked at the strange phenomenon in the sky with a shocked expression. The Federation's presidential palace was already filled with hysterical shouts and curses. What on earth is going on? Who can tell me what those things in the sky are? Mr. President, it should be that monster that's attacking us. But I don't know why it keeps attacking the sky. The series of explosions just now is enough to destroy the entire Federation 10 times over. We need countermeasures. Where's Judy M? There was no one left in the war room. Everyone had already run out, their gazes fixed on the flashing explosions and flames in the sky from time to time. No one even cared about the battle on Woody's side. Most of them had already felt despair at the situation before them. What on earth is going on? That monster actually has such great power. But what's he doing in the sky? Is he trying to show off to us? Even Lianping is far from this level of power. Humans can't stop him anymore. The Federation is finished. When the psychic energy incarnation was gradually at a disadvantage in the battle against Higram, he also noticed the impact of this battle on the Western continent. He began to actively shift the battlefield to the outer space of the universe. This caused him, who was already at a disadvantage, to become even more passive in the battle. Run, run, run. If you can't run, then die. Higram's thoughts seemed to have been completely consumed by anger. His eyes had already turned blood-red, and his raging angry intent left behind a trail of flames that was thousands of meters long. He had already chased after the psychic energy incarnation. Just as the battle between the two of them was becoming more and more intense and escalating, in the valley of New Dongyang Lianping stood up. The wounds on his chest and wrist were slowly wriggling and recovering. They were the effects of the psychic energy incarnation being transferred to him. It seems that I won't be able to control him if I just use the psychic energy incarnation. The instant this thought flashed through his mind, Lianping's movements were faster than his thoughts. He only left behind an afterimage as he flew toward outer space at full speed. Chapter 345. The surface of Woody's skin had turned into a mirror-like metallic form, and a 1 millimeter radius around him was covered by a layer of repulsive force field that was hard to see with the naked eye. This was the defensive form of his 6 transformations. A giant green fireball charged at Woody, but unlike his previous strategy of dodging, Woody didn't try to dodge, and instead directly embraced the giant fireball. The green flame, fueled by spirit and consciousness, was repelled by the repulsive field on Woody's body, and couldn't burn him at all. Fabrizio's giant body was blocked by Woody just like that, and he kept howling in pain. Woody felt his body slowly moving back. Fabrizio's strength was so great that he felt like he could easily escape from his embrace. "What are you waiting for? Don't worry about me." Golden Light and Xia Likong heard him and attacked at the same time. Psychic bullets as dense as a meteor shower, as well as an omnidirectional attack filled with lightning and tornadoes. The blazing energy was like an inverted bowl, completely enveloping Fabrizio and Woody's position. When the smoke dissipated, only Woody, who was still in his metallic form, was left in his original position. Fabrizio had completely disappeared. It had been more than 3 hours since the start of the battle. After expending a lot of energy and stamina, Woody, Xia Likong, and the others had finally eliminated Fabrizio. However, during the battle, Fabrizio used Carmen's body as a parasite, killing Carmen and heavily injuring Brian. If it weren't for Xia Likong and Golden Light's support, the operation would have failed. In this situation where Fabrizio was first weakened by Higram, and then struck down by the spirit energy clone, under the joint attack of Woody and Xia Likong, 2 level 5 ability users, he was still able to fight to this extent. This was enough to prove that as a level 5 ability user, Fabrizio's demon race, regardless of whether it was vitality or combat strength, far exceeded humans of the same level. Bursts of green smoke rose from Woody's metallized body, and the high temperature caused the surrounding air to distort. Woody looked at Jin Guang and Xia Likong, who were also exhausted. He also looked at Tony, Yen Bei, and Brian, who had fainted on the ground. "The 2 of you must be from Xia. There have been a lot of rumors about you guys recently." Woody pointed at the sky and said, "Can you explain what is going on in the sky? If I'm not mistaken, the one who appeared just now was the clone of your Xia Emperor, right?" Although 3 hours had passed, the battle between Higram and the psychic energy clone had never stopped. It was just that the battlefield had become the space outside the Earth. From time to time, star-like lights would appear in the sky. More than half of the western continent could see them. He was even more shocked by the strength of the monster from before. At the same time, Woody felt an indescribable bitterness in his mouth. This was because he had already seen Li Anping's psychic energy incarnation before his opponent shifted the battlefield to the air. That was how he had confirmed Li Anping's existence. Li Anping is invincible? It was only now that Woody realized the huge gap between him and his opponent. It was something that could not be sensed just by looking at the intelligence report. When Xia Likong heard Woody's question, he calmly said, "His Majesty is concerned about the safety of the entire human race." After noticing the strange movements of the humanoid monster, he secretly snuck into the western continent. As for now, he is naturally fighting to destroy that monster. At this point, Xia Likong suddenly looked at an empty spot and said, "I wonder if this friend here understands?" Countless particles seemed to have gathered together in the spot that was originally empty, forming into Judy Eleanor's appearance. She had been hiding here all this time without making a move. The moment she appeared, she said to Woody, whose expression had changed, "When I arrived, Carmen had already been possessed. I was only hiding to help you guys hold the line." Woody glared at Judy Eleanor fiercely. Obviously, he knew that it was not as simple as he said. It was only because of the existence of the 2 members of Xia Dragonfinch, Xia Likong and Jin Guang. Judy might have been planning to exhaust Xia Dragonfinch's strength. She might even be planning to be the Oriole behind the mantis stalking the cicada. When Woody thought that Carmen might have been sacrificed because of this dark scheming, he felt even more uncomfortable. However, Xia Dragonfinch was still an outsider, so he was not in a hurry to argue with Judy. He had already decided that once the battle was over, he would find Judy and give Carmen and Brian enough compensation. But will there be a future? Wu Di looked up at the stars in the sky, and he couldn't help but feel worried. Judy frowned and asked, Woody, are you sure that the one fighting the monster up there is Lianping? Woody nodded. There's no mistake. It's the Qi clone he used in the Battle of Tianjing. The various governments had long gathered the details of the Battle of Tianjing, and the information regarding Lianping's Qi clone was of the utmost importance. Although she had received confirmation from both Woody and Xia Likong, Judy still had a look of disbelief in her eyes as she looked at the starlight that kept bursting out in the sky. The power that had been revealed in the battle between the Qi clone and Higram had completely exceeded their estimation of Lianping's strength back in the Battle of Tianjing. Invincible under the heavens. These 4 words were so heavy that even Judy Eleanor felt an endless pressure in her heart. Regardless of whether Lianping wins or loses, the Federation is finished. The Virtual Mathematics Service also needs to make early plans. Thinking of this, Judy Eleanor once again lifted her head and looked towards Xia Likong and the others. However, Xia Likong and Jin Guang did not pay much attention to this. Fabrizio, who had fought an intense battle with them for over 3 hours, had already made them understand how powerful these monsters were. What made them even more worried was that, as members of the Xia Dragonfinch, this was the first time they had seen someone who could fight against Lianping for so long. In outer space, 2 figures, one black and one red, were like 2 shooting stars, constantly colliding and tearing at each other. Hygrim's eyes had turned completely red, and even his pupils could no longer be seen. His enraged intent had also risen to a length of over 2,000 meters from his body. Wherever it passed, the particles and even the Qi clones would be mercilessly suppressed and rejected by him. Hygrim fought against the Qi clones in close combat, turning the surrounding space into a state of vacuum. The various elements and energies in outer space, which were already scarce, were all completely rejected by the Qi clones. This caused the Qi clones to be unable to use their spiritual force fields to perform various powerful moves. This caused the Qi clones to only be able to rely on their own strength. Although as the battle progressed, Hygrim's body had been filled with the will of fury, this fury was constantly being converted into power and enraged intent, allowing him to still have a certain level of ability to think. Black clearly hasn't even reached the 6th energy level, yet he was able to use that kind of move earlier. But it's good now. The enraged intent has completely cut off the energy around him. Right now, he can only unleash the power of a 5th energy level at most. Just then, the Qi clones clashed with Hygrim's fists several thousand times. Hygrim was still completely unscathed, while every time the Qi clones were hit by Hygrim's fists, traces of black Qi would dissipate from the Qi clones. It seemed as if the Qi clones in his body were getting weaker and weaker. However, this process was very slow, and with the Qi clones constantly replenishing their own Qi, it was even slower. Even if I only use the enraged intent and my fists and legs, he'll still be dead after 10 hours. A cruel smile appeared on Hygrim's face. The red enraged intent had already gathered on his shoulders, and with a dash, he charged into the Qi clone's embrace. Abnormal martial style. Star destruction. The space within a radius of several kilometers seemed to have collapsed from this collision. Hygrim was like an aircraft carrier that was crushing a small sampan in front of it. Boom! Without a sound, the Qi clones were sent flying several hundred kilometers away by this collision, flying into the depths of the universe. Black Qi continued to surge all over his body. Clearly, the power of this attack was too strong, and it had severely damaged the Qi clone's structure. This is the Black Devil? You're so weak that it's laughable. Let me use your power. His will turned into electromagnetic waves at the speed of light, catching up to the Qi clones that had been sent flying. The next moment, the red enraged intent trembled violently and split into 2 wing-like objects that were over 1,000 meters long, spreading out on Hygrim's left and right. Abnormal martial style. God's wrath. Heavenly fall. The wings formed by the enraged intent shattered, and countless streams of qi that were hard to see with the naked eye turned into a state that was similar to quantum states. They simulated the transition process of electrons, releasing a tremendous amount of energy. The energy turned into an unstoppable torrent that gushed toward the qi clones. Wherever it passed by, everything before it turned into chaos. The violent turbulence was like an interstellar cannon, instantly chasing after the qi clones with astonishing destructive powers that could instantly wipe out the entire food chain on the surface. God's wrath, heavenly fall. This was the most violent and insane attack that Higram, who was at the 7th energy level, could unleash. Using the enraged intent to push it to its peak, the torrent of energy that was like a supernova explosion was about to drown the qi clones in an instant. Before this terrifyingly strong power that could make one feel despair, it was as if every single atom in the world was wailing and trembling. Seeing that the qi clones had been completely drowned by his own powers, Hygram's eyes were filled with excitement. This is me. Higram. I shall become the greatest warrior of the demon race. Rule over the endless multivariate universe. Become the king of kings. The god of gods. Just as Higram was enjoying the endless joy brought by his victory, a huge palm suddenly descended from the sky, grabbing onto his head. Higram? Welcome to Earth. At the next moment, a destructive power that completely surpassed that of the qi clones exploded from the other party's palm, and it took effect on Hygram's head without holding back. Chapter 346. When Lianping had been studying the magnetic field in his body, he had already understood one thing. Due to the nature of his psychic incarnation, he could not use electromagnetic forces to propel his psychic incarnation like his main body. Therefore, when Lianping was able to change the magnetic field in his body and push his strength to an unprecedented height, he understood that in terms of pure speed and strength, he had already completely surpassed his psychic incarnation. And this surge of physical strength, released through the virtual force field, caused Lianping's strength to undergo a complete qualitative change. Black? This is your main body? But why is your main body even stronger than your psychic incarnation? And so much stronger? Higram felt that the hand grabbing onto his head was like a giant pillar that held up the sky. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not break free. Moreover, the destructive power that was continuously swallowing and spitting out from his opponent's body made him feel even more shocked. Waialeayaya. Having his head grabbed by his opponent like this, Higram could only feel boundless fury erupting from the bottom of his heart. His enraged intent and pure brute force also continued to grow and soar under the support of this fury. Get out of my way! As this surge of furious will spread out in all directions, Hygram's physical strength soared wildly. The muscles in his forelimbs twisted and trembled violently, as if wanting to completely shake off the virtual force field that Lianping had applied. However, it was useless. His enraged intent and physical strength, which had worked so well previously, were now unable to break through Lianping's blockade. Higram felt like an insect that had been frozen in amber, unable to move at all from head to toe. This feeling of helplessness made the flames of fury in his heart burn even more fiercely. However, Lianping did not care how angry Higram was. As if he was holding up a little chick, he twisted Hygram's body toward himself, and saw his opponent's twisted, irritable, and furious face. This Hygram's strength has almost reached 50 points, and it's still increasing. No wonder even his psychic incarnation was completely suppressed by him. Behind Lianping was the black psychic incarnation. Before Hygram's heavenly fury hit him, the psychic incarnation had already returned to Lianping's side. But after using electromagnetic forces to boost my physical strength, my current strength and speed have already broken through 60 points. If I'm given more time, these numbers should be even higher. Currently, Lianping's physical fitness was 60. 2. His speed 60. 6. And his physical fitness 60. 1. If Li Anping was given enough time to familiarize himself with this power and collect more energy, his physical fitness would be even higher. But for now, it was more than enough to deal with Hygrim. Bang! Li Anping grabbed Hygrim's head with one hand, and his right fist seemed to have turned into a stream of light, a wave, and a layer of dense fog. Bringing along a power that could shake the continental shelf, the fist surged violently toward Hygrim's face. With just one punch, Hygrim, who hadn't been hurt by nuclear fusion, high-energy laser, high temperature, or any other means, had a constipated expression on his face. Because of the pain. It was excruciatingly painful. In his entire life, Hygrim had never experienced the word pain so intensely. His face, which had been unscathed all this while, now felt as if his nose had become crooked. Li Anping also felt pain, but he also felt exhilaration. At this moment, whether it was the surrounding energy or matter, they were all expelled by his fury intent. Within a radius of 100 meters, there was only him and Hygrim. 80% of my strength is no longer a problem. Then let me see where I can go with my full strength. He could finally unleash the power of his physical body without any worries. He waved his fist to his heart's content. Boom! Another punch. If there was a medium in the universe, then this punch would probably directly turn all matter in the surroundings into powder. But now, Hygrim could only bear all of this alone. If all of the principles behind this punch were removed and slowed down thousands of times, then this was just a simple, unadorned, and extremely simple punch. However, it was precisely this simple punch that, after being pushed by Li Anping with the most extreme and violent power, had achieved the effect of destroying all things and dominating everything. Hygrim felt as if his face had been hit by a huge planet, and then mercilessly crushed. Under this terrifying power, the rays of the sun shining on the two seemed to have started to bend slightly. Did this mean that the power of Li Anping's punch had already started to distort time and space? Hygrim didn't know. He was in no mood to think about this at all. After being punched twice in the head by Li Anping, he felt as if he was a martial arts champion who had been mercilessly beaten up by a street gangster. The techniques he had learned since he was young were actually unable to be used in front of the naked violence of his opponent. Hygrim, who had been completely unscathed all this while, now had a small dent directly on his face. Meanwhile, at an angle that was hard to detect with the naked eye, the countless particles that formed his body turned into powder under this punch, drifting out from his face. He only felt boundless anger and boundless humiliation. Ah! There was no sound from his furious howl, but it turned into omnipresent electromagnetic waves, spreading out in all directions. Under this unprecedented fury, the enraged intent on Hygrim's body grew crazily, as if it had been doused with fuel. In an instant it grew by several hundred meters. His power also increased greatly, growing crazily in the void force field. But it was useless, so noisy. As Li Anping transmitted these words through electromagnetic waves, his right fist landed on Hygrim's head like rays of light. Even with Hygrim's supervision, he could only feel that he was drowned in a boundless sea of light. Each of Li Anping's punches was like a bolt of lightning, mercilessly bombarding his face, causing him to be engulfed in endless pain and fury. In just a few short seconds, Li Anping had already thrown out several thousand punches toward Hygrim. Even with the toughness of his body, he still felt some pain in his right hand. Hygrim's face looked even more deformed, and there was even a 2-inch-long crack on his forehead. This guy is really tough. Seeing that Li Anping had stopped, Hygrim stared at Li Anping with a face full of hatred. His eyes were like two red gems, showing how much fury was surging in his heart. You're dead meat. I definitely won't kill you easily. I'll let you experience what true hell is, what true pain is. Li Anping ignored him, and only turned his head to look. It's about time. Hygrim seemed to have realized something as well, and also turned his head to look. In the direction of Earth, only a black dot could be seen. It seemed to be brewing something. While Li Anping was subduing Higram, the Nianqi clone had gotten closer to Earth, came into contact with more atoms, and brewed a real attack. Countless hydrogen ions spun and accelerated by the Nianqi clone, producing a large amount of positrons. Then, these positrons kept converging under the constraints of the magnetic field. An invisible beam of light shot out from the Nianqi clone's palm. The annihilation reaction between the positrons and electrons released a huge amount of energy at this moment. However, the positrons, which had reached their maximum power in a vacuum and were invisible and colorless, did not hit Higram immediately. Instead, they brushed past Hygram's body and shot into the boundless universe. However, before Higram could rejoice, a strong and powerful arm had already grabbed the back of Hygram's head and pressed his entire face into the torrent of positron cannon. It was as if an ordinary person's head had been stuffed into a pool of sulfuric acid. Li Anping could feel an intense struggle coming from his hand. However, in the next moment, as the torrent of positron cannon became increasingly ferocious, Li Anping had already retreated rapidly, and Hygram's entire body had been completely submerged. He felt as if his body was continuously melting, and countless tiny particles were continuously peeling off. It was like the final howl of a dying wild beast. However, a few seconds later, Hygram's enraged intent still pushed aside all the energy in the surroundings. Higram, whose body had shrunk to 1/5 of its original size, was now like a shooting star, flying rapidly in the direction of Earth. At this moment, other than being filled with fury, there was also a hint of fear in his heart. This monster. I have to hurry back. Daddy will definitely be able to deal with him. Looking at Hygram's fleeing figure, the corners of Li Anping's lips curled up slightly, revealing a hint of a cold smile. On the boundless white land, a blue spatial door appeared on the ground. This door was like a crack that had appeared in space, as if it could lead to a faraway world. Gabe, who had been ordered by Higram to guard this place, was looking furiously at the two strange-looking monsters before him. One of them was a lion with a human face, while the other was a creature that was floating in the air like a jellyfish. Gabe, what are you trying to do? Could it be that you're thinking of taking this world for yourself? Faced with their doubts, Gabe said with a displeased expression, "This new world has already been taken over by His Highness. Everything in here belongs to His Highness. You guys can scram." The two monsters exchanged a hesitant glance. When they heard the words His Highness, their imposing auras were completely gone. The guy with a human head and a lion's body said weakly, "But this is a discovery made by a spy." The jellyfish at the side also chimed in, "At least let us go in and take a look. This is the discovery of a new world. No matter what, we have to be allowed to inspect it. Otherwise, it'll be hard for us to explain things to His Highness." Gabe frowned and said casually, "It's just an ordinary resource planet. After some time, His Highness will bring over some soil and ores from there for you guys. You just have to follow the report." Hearing that, the two monsters exchanged a glance. However, the other party was a prince. Although he was the prince with the weakest influence, he was definitely not someone whom they, as low-level demons, could control. Just as the two monsters were at a loss of what to do, the spatial door suddenly started to tremble. Chapter 347. Is His Highness here? Gabe frowned and looked in the direction of the dimensional crossing gate. His Highness has returned so quickly? Hygram's slightly deformed head popped out from the spatial gate, and then he reached out his arm toward Gabe. "Save." He only managed to say one word when something seemed to pull him back to the other side of the dimensional crossing gate, leaving behind a sudden agonizing cry. That was His Highness? This scene was simply too horrifying for the three demons in front of them. This was especially so for Gabe, who knew Hygram's true abilities. He quickly walked up to the dimensional crossing gate, his face filled with disbelief. However, at the next moment, a thick arm reached out from the dimensional crossing gate, grabbing onto Gabe's head and dragging him over as well amidst his intense struggle. Ah! The remaining two monsters cried out and turned to flee. However, at the next moment their bodies were swept by two dazzling light beams, and their bodies were instantly annihilated into countless particles. 2 hours later, in the death zone in the northern part of the Code Nation. As far as the eye could see, there were huge craters, shattered ground, destroyed mountains, and cut-off rivers. The entire death zone looked as if two giants had wrestled with each other. Other than ruins, there were all sorts of corpses that belonged to humans and monsters. In the deepest part of the death zone, Lianping was holding onto a gray arm. On the ground under his feet there were all sorts of strange body parts. There were feet, knees, hands, shoulders, and so on. Lianping was now grabbing onto an arm and biting down on it. As he chewed on the gray flesh in his mouth, he said, "It seems that he isn't as hard as you. But why doesn't he have a soul?" Lianping could only sense that Gabe's flesh contained a lot of energy, all of which he could absorb and store. However, unlike how he had absorbed the souls and bodies of humans in the past, this energy was just ordinary energy and could not be used to strengthen his physical attribute. And there's such a unique body structure. In the psychic incarnation, Hygrim's entire body was sealed in the chest of the psychic incarnation. Only half of his head was exposed to the air, allowing him to speak. Hearing Lianping's words, he said disdainfully, we're all demons. What's the difference between eating our bodies and eating your own? As for the soul?" He laughed. "Our race never had a soul." Lianping didn't say anything, but he analyzed in his heart. No soul? Were they completely relying on their biological brains to think? But on the other side of the door, I absorbed the souls of the two demons that were killed, although there was no increase in attributes. Does this mean that demons are also divided into many groups? At this time, Hygrim seemed to have finally reacted. His expression changed as he suddenly said, "No, why don't you even know this? Aren't you black? But why do you have the power of black?" At this point, he seemed to have thought of a possibility, but he looked at Lianping in disbelief. Lianping glanced at him, and then ate the arm in his hand bite by bite. "You're right. I'm a human." "How is that possible?" Hygrim was agitated. It looked like he was watching a pig eat a human. It could be seen how big of a blow Lianping's identity as a human was to him. "How can you be a human? Don't get excited." Lianping pointed a finger at his forehead and licked his lip. "Your level is higher than his, right? Not only is your body much stronger than this one, but you can also reduce your body size to maintain the integrity of your body's combat structure." "How interesting." Lianping licked his lips again and said, "Although it's a bit troublesome to do, I still want to try it." "Damn human." Hearing Lianping's words, Hygrim was furious. "You're dead. We've already discovered this world. My brother, my father, they'll all come to save me. They'll eat you, all your friends, family, and everyone you know. If you don't want to die, let go of me quickly." As he spoke, he began to struggle wildly. However, as his body shrank, his strength seemed to have weakened greatly, making it impossible for him to break free from the restraints of the psychic energy incarnation. Lianping looked at Hygrim with a murderous look in his eyes. However, the other party didn't have a soul, and the spiritual force field couldn't read his memories from the cerebral cortex. As for the devils and the land of white, Lianping had too many things that he wanted to know. He suddenly opened his mouth and bit down on Hygrim's head. Hygrim could still clearly see his teeth and saliva. Seeing Lianping slowly biting down, Hygrim shouted, "Are you crazy? You're dragging the entire human race down with you. Stop it." However, Lianping ignored him and slowly bit down. No matter how much Hygrim screamed, Lianping didn't stop at all. It wasn't until Lianping's teeth bit down on Hygrim's head that Hygrim finally revealed his cowardly side and began to beg for mercy. "Enough. What do you want?" As long as I can do it, I'll agree. Don't eat me. Lianping stretched his head back and wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth. The way he looked at Higram, the way he looked at food, made the latter's heart fill with coldness. I want to know the situation of the entire White Land. As he spoke, Lianping pointed at the stomach of the psychic energy incarnation. Gabe's head was twisted off and bound there, and he was looking at Lianping angrily. I'll also ask him. If there's any discrepancy in your answers, I'll take a bite out of each of you until you're completely eaten. Fear flashed through Hygrim's eyes, and he directly said, The White Land is a continent with no end. It's the place we've lived since we were born. No end? How is that possible? Isn't it a planet? Hygrim laughed disdainfully. Human, your ignorance really makes me laugh. Seeing the coldness in Lianping's eyes, he immediately stopped laughing and continued, It's like the universe you're in has no end and is constantly expanding. The White Land doesn't have any space in the universe. Instead, it's an endless land. This land has been constantly expanding since it was born. Its size is limitless. Then what's with the teleportation gate? That's a world-crossing gate. In the Land of White, there are some areas where spacetime is relatively unstable. If you use a special method there, you can open a door to another world. However, most of them are dead zones without life. Only a few of them have life. Lianping touched his chin. He did not expect the White Land to be like this. He then asked, Will the demons invade these worlds? Of course. Hygrim revealed a matter-of-fact expression. The resources in the White Land are very scarce. Only by invading these worlds can we obtain more resources and develop better. Then, this time, you've discovered Earth. Will you still send people over? Hearing this question, Hygrim immediately felt confident again and said loudly, Of course. Do you think it's common to see a world crossing a world and not have a desolate dead zone on the other side? They'll definitely come. As long as any one of my brothers comes, you humans will be finished. You won't even be able to protect yourself. Lianping thought of the difference between the appearance of the monsters and Hygrim's arrival, which was almost 2 years. He could not help but ask, I've already killed all the people you sent this time. How long do you think it will take for them to come back next time? Hygrim frowned and seemed to be hesitating. This was very important information, but thinking that Gabe would also be questioned, and Lianping had just eaten Gabe's arm, he closed his eyes and said, According to your timing rules, it'll be about a year to a year and a half. A year to a year and a half? Thinking of this, Lianping raised his head and looked toward the south of the western continent. We have to hurry. Then, let's unify Earth first. 4 hours ago, that was when the psychic energy incarnation was still fighting with Hygrim in space. In the Grand Canyon in the north of the Federation, a man was carrying a boy who looked to be only 2 or 3 years old on his back, heading toward the depths of the Great Canyon. The two of them were Night Beast monk Shang Tian, who had escaped from Xia Dragonfinch. However, why would the two of them appear in the Great Canyon in the north of the Federation at this very moment? Night Beast looked at the surrounding cliffs filled with strange rocks and mumbled, Shao Tian, are you sure we want to come here? The terrain of this place is too terrible. Once Xia Laikong and the others come chasing after us, it'll be hard for us to escape. Hearing Night Beast's words, it seemed that during this period of time when the two of them were on the run, Shang Tian, a 2-year-old child, would be the one making the decisions. Shang Tian said in a clear child's voice, Don't worry, Uncle Knight. Xia Laikong and the others don't have the time to care about us right now. But what's the use of us coming here? We're looking for someone. He might be our last hope. Shang Tian's eyes exuded a vicissitude that far surpassed his age. It was as if countless memories were flashing in his eyes. Compared to the last time he had appeared, it was as if he had grown up many years in a short period of time. The current Lianping is no longer someone we can deal with. Therefore, we've come here to look for him. Night Beast asked, Shao Tian, your talent is very strong. There's no need to be in such a hurry to take revenge. I believe that as long as you work hard, you'll definitely be able to surpass Li Anping in 10 or 20 years' time. Shang Tian shook his head. I won't be able to surpass him. That monster's rate of improvement far surpasses our imagination. But at the very least, there's still time. The current Li Anping should only have started researching electromagnetic forces. Once he completes quantization, it'll really be too late. By then, we won't have any means of killing him. Quantization. Night Beast was a university graduate after all. Although he did not major in physics, he had heard of this term before. He asked, You're saying that he can turn his body into many quantum particles? If that's the case, although it'll be hard to kill him, his essence is still energy, right? It's not impossible to kill him. Shang Tian let out a sigh. It's not like that. Quantization is just an abbreviation. By then, he won't be anywhere, yet he will also be everywhere. It's a little like the wave function of electrons, like the cloud of probabilities. However, we won't have any means of observing him. And this is probably not the end of his evolution. However, even if it's just this step, he'll have already become an existence that we'll never be able to kill. Yi Shou was confused by Shang Tian's words, but a young man's voice continued to speak. You're saying that the man by the name of Li Anping will become a god? The man who had appeared had a buzz cut and was wearing a strange ethnic costume. A gust of wind blew in the valley, and his body emitted clanking sounds. Night Beast looked warily at the young man with the buzz cut who had suddenly appeared. However, Shang Tian, who was on his back, smiled and answered the young man's question. No, he's even more terrifying than a god. He'll become the nightmare of all living creatures in the multivariate universe, becoming the ultimate. While Shang Tian was speaking, the young man with the brush cut echoed his words. The two of them seemed to speak in unison. Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. However, the young man's tone was one of doubt, while Shang Tian's was one of certainty. Fervor appeared in the young man's eyes, while Shang Tian heaved a sigh of relief. He clenched his small fists tightly, and a hint of determination flashed in his eyes. If this is fate, then this Li Anping, the devil released by our clan, will be buried by me with my own hands. Sensing that the young man's killing intent had gradually dissipated due to his words, Shang Tian said, Higram isn't the only one who's discovered you. Li Anping has also discovered you. If I hadn't come to look for you, you'd have been killed by him 4 hours later. 4 hours later, which was now, after temporarily ending Hygram's interrogation, Li Anping's body appeared in the sky above the Great Canyon. A hint of confusion appeared in his eyes. The spiritual imprint I planted on that spy's body has disappeared here? His powerful spiritual force field was like a radar, scanning through every inch of the Great Canyon bit by bit. Then with a flash, Li Anping's figure appeared in the deepest part of the canyon, where Violet had been excavating. However, this place had already been cleaned up by Violet after the incident, and there weren't too many traces left behind. Some of the shattered remains were reassembled in Li Anping's mind, allowing him to see Violet's imprint once again. Then with another flash, Li Anping's figure appeared in the grotto that Violet had used all sorts of methods to collect blood to open up. However, not only had all the murals been cleaned up, even the giant statue had disappeared. The only trace left behind in the entire area was Violet's imprint. Chapter 348. In a hospital in the Federation, a luxurious ward had been transformed into a temporary command room. In short, there's no room for discussion on this matter. If you don't agree, I'll just withdraw from the virtual machine. Woody, who had already deactivated his transformation, said these words to Judith Arnold in front of him. He then pushed the door open and strode out of the door. Judith's trusted assistant walked in cautiously. Looking at Judith's uncertain expression, the assistant asked softly, "Sir, is it still about Carmen?" Judith sighed deeply. She only felt that the building was about to collapse, and it was difficult for a single tree to support the situation. "It's nothing. How are they doing?" She was asking about Yen Bei, who was sent to the hospital. The assistant said, "Xia Likong and Jingguang are still accompanying Yen Bei. Yen Bei has already finished the operation. According to the doctor, with his physique, he should be able to recover in 2 to 3 weeks. What about Tony Abel? He has a large number of fractures all over his body. His life is no longer in danger. His sister is accompanying him." Seeing that the assistant was a little restless, Judith said impatiently, "What other news is there? Tell me all at once." "More than an hour ago, we detected multiple earthquakes of magnitude 6 to 8 in the dead zone in the northern part of the Code State," the assistant said with a solemn expression. "According to the detection results of the drone and satellite images, I'm afraid that the battle between Li Anping and the monster has already ended. Is that so?" Hearing this news, Judith's brows furrowed deeply. Her heart was full of contradictions. She hoped that Li Anping would die, but she also hoped that the monster would die. Of course, the best outcome would be for the two monsters to perish together, but this was obviously very unlikely. At this moment, the pupils of Judith and the assistant shrank at the same time. They both turned around and looked at the window in the room with a vigilant expression. A human figure completely composed of psychic energy was floating quietly there. Li Anping. When Judith's gaze swept over the little higram on the chest of the psychic energy incarnation, a trace of shock flashed through her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. Li Anping naturally had no interest in understanding what she was thinking. He merely put out 3 fingers toward Judy and said calmly, 3 days. I'll give the Federation and the imaginary agency a total of 3 days to surrender. 3 days later, I'll personally make a trip to the Federation's president's office. After saying that, the Nianqi incarnation looked at Judy deeply before disappearing in a flash. When the assistant saw that the Nianqi body had disappeared, his legs gave way and he could not help but fall to the ground. They didn't know if it was because of the other party's fame, the strength that the other party had displayed, or the aura that Li Anping had displayed just now was too shocking. He felt as if he was dancing on the edge of a blade, as if his life and death were no longer in his own hands. Judith's expression did not seem to have changed much, but her shirt, which was soaked in cold sweat, showed that she was clearly not as calm as she appeared. Just then, the door was opened once again. A member of the imaginary agency rushed in and shouted, "Madam, the intensive care unit. The 3 ability users in the intensive care unit have all disappeared." Judith naturally knew that Li Anping had probably taken her subordinates away. She waved her hand impatiently and said, "Got it. You can leave now." She was still considering what Li Anping had said earlier. Surrender within 3 days? What a joke. Do you think the Federation is like 100 months? I'll drown in their spittle just by telling them this news. She suddenly frowned. Seeing that the member had yet to leave, she asked, "Is there anything else?" The member shook his head and threw a strange glance at Judith before quickly leaving. Just as Judith felt that it was strange, the assistant beside her pointed at her forehead. "Madam, your head." Judith's expression changed. She touched her forehead, and her hand was covered in blood. She did not know when a wound had appeared between her eyebrows. She did not need to think to know that this was Li Anping's threat to her. This bastard! Next, Li Anping sent Xia Likong and the other 2 back to Xia. As for himself, he stayed behind and waited for the Federation's response. As for the peeping Tom that Li Anping had been tracking, as well as the clues about Violet left behind in the canyon, Li Anping did not plan to care about them for now. The most important thing was still to unify the entire human race and increase his own strength in preparation for the next attack of the demon race. Originally, Li Anping wanted to use the peaceful method to prevent unnecessary internal friction and casualties. He wanted to use the psychic energy incarnation to possess Tony Abel's body and slowly devour the entire Federation before finally unifying the Western continent. However, the information about the demons had far exceeded Li Anping's expectations. There was no time for him to peacefully unify, so he chose to use the fastest and most violent method to rule the Western continent. Naturally, this method would have many side effects, but Li Anping couldn't care less about it now. After all, the crisis of the demons was imminent. According to Higram, the fighting power of the demons was just like what Black had said. There were a total of 10 levels, which was 5 levels higher than the 5 levels of the human race. Under the same level of energy, the fighting power of the demons was stronger than normal human ability users. For example, Fabrizio's strength was the standard 5th level among the demons. However, when facing humans, he could fight against 2 to 3 5th level ability users alone. If there was no ability to restrain him, he could even win. Hygram's strength had just entered the 7th level. With his fighting power alone, if he did not meet Li Anping, he could wipe out all the human forces on Earth with his eyes closed. Not to mention the 8th and 9th level demon powerhouses. According to Higram and Gabe, the strongest demons were the 7 9th level demon gods. They were the 7 surviving demon gods of the so-called 12 demon god. These 7 demon gods were divided into 2 factions. Normally, they would restrict each other in the White Land, or they would be responsible for attacking some particularly powerful foreign world. Before they confirmed the danger and value of Earth, they would not personally make a move. The next demon that was sent over might be a 7th or 8th level monster. No matter which one it was, it would definitely be much stronger than Higram, who had just entered the 7th level. Li Anping did some calculations. Although he had the 6th level spirit force field and his own 5th level ability, he had already walked a new path. This path of evolution that belonged to him was based on his ability and human knowledge. His strength could no longer be judged simply by the ability levels of the 2 abilities he possessed. In terms of ability level, because he had the 6th level spirit force field, he could be considered a 6th level ability user. However, in terms of performance, his main body's fighting power was around the 7th level, which was higher than Hygram's. Meanwhile, his psychic incarnation was around the 6th level, which was higher than Heaven Queen's. In order to deal with the demon crisis, he needed even greater strength. Chapter 349. 2 days later, in the morning, Li Anping stood on the street in front of the president's office. Zhu Di and a group of ability users from the virtual machine were following behind him. There were still traces of smoke and dried blood on the surrounding street. This was the result of the anti-surrenders who had led the soldiers to attack the president's office. The ability users behind Li Anping and the soldiers who had taken over the various checkpoints on the streets were the people of the Federation who had surrendered. According to Zhu Di's statistics, about 80% of the Federation's forces had chosen to surrender. This was due to the high degree of control that the Federation's ability user clans had over power. It was also due to the invincible power that Li Anping had displayed several times. As for the remaining 20% of the forces, they were completely out of control. They raised the banner of righteousness high and would fight for the Federation's independence. They had even temporarily occupied some second-tier cities in the Federation. Li Anping did not care who these people were, what kind of power they had, or how they would resist him. These were things that his subordinates should do. He raised his hands, and a large amount of materials placed on the street flew up. These were the materials that he had asked Zhu Di to prepare over the past few days for the sake of building the warp gate today. He did not have that much time to spend on the unification of the Western continent. Naturally, he would leave this matter to his subordinates. Countless materials moved rapidly, transformed, and reassembled in front of him. A strange building that was alternating between blue and yellow slowly unfolded on the street in front of the president's office like a bouquet of flowers. The blueprint of the warp gate was stored in Lianping's brain. The building that was extremely complicated for ordinary people was as simple as putting together blocks of building blocks for him. Countless metal threads broke out from the surface of the metal building like plants and trees breaking out from the ground. They overlapped and intertwined with each other before drilling into the ground like electric wires. They were connected to the Federation's power grid. In a short 15 minutes, a blue light gradually lit up, and a simple warp gate was completed under Lianping's control. Then, with a flash of blue light, a man's figure gradually appeared before the warp gate. Bai Xinghe opened his eyes and looked around. Then, he lowered his head and said to Lianping, "Your Majesty," as Lianping had informed him in advance, he had been waiting at the center of the space warp gate in Tianjing. Lianping nodded and said, "I'll give you a month's time. You can use all the forces on the Western continent and all the aptitude users on the Eastern continent except the RES. If you need my support, you can also contact me. I only have one request. After 1 month, all of my orders must be unimpeded throughout the entire Western continent." Bai Xinghe put on a confident smile. "I understand, Your Majesty." Behind Lianping, there was a trace of unwillingness in Judy's eyes, but she didn't dare to show it. Before she surrendered, she had already thought about it. Lianping wouldn't completely trust surrenderers like them. He would definitely use his own subordinates to take over them. Only after a period of time would they be able to slowly integrate into Lianping's forces. Lianping didn't say anything else. He directly walked past Bai Xinghe and walked towards the warp gate. Then, he disappeared in a flash of blue light. Bai Xinghe had been an emperor in the past, and he was one of the strongest among the level 5 aptitude users. Apart from Tyrell, almost all of the level 5 aptitude users in the human world were either killed by Lianping or dead. Add to that the fact that Xia had been developing Lianping and the Federation's allegiance over the past 2 years, Lianping believed that even without him, it was only a matter of time before the Western continent was unified. After Lianping disappeared, members of Xia Dragonfinch and Xia's officials appeared on the Federation's land through the warp gate one after another. They would reform the Federation's government structure, take over the management of the army and aptitude users, eliminate all opposition forces, and turn the entire Western continent into Lianping's territory. After Lianping handed over the matter of unifying the Western continent to Bai Xinghe, he didn't care about it for the time being. He directly activated the warp gate and arrived at Tianjing's warp center. Then, he switched to another warp gate and arrived at New Dongyang. In the valley where he had previously secluded himself, all kinds of trucks, cranes, forklifts, and monsters were busy. They were transporting all kinds of materials here according to Lianping's instructions. "How are the materials?" Sherwin followed behind Lianping. Hearing this, he replied, "The materials that you requested us to prepare, we have already prepared them. However, Your Majesty, the materials you've brought here." Although he could already guess what Lianping was going to do when he saw the list of materials that Lianping had requested, he couldn't figure out why. Lianping looked at the valley that looked like a construction site. Many huge containers were neatly placed on the cleared space. His powerful mental energy swept past those containers, and the list of materials appeared in Lianping's mind. They matched the requirements that he had asked for in his memory and were as accurate as a supercomputer. Double the amount of U-235. Boron carbide, silverindium cadmium, and heavy water are also missing. Demote the person in charge by 1 level. Sherwin immediately nodded in agreement. He felt bad for the person in charge and the person in charge of these materials. Lianping's request was too urgent. Ordinary people, even if they were aptitude users, were not supercomputers. When it came to transporting materials, it was very likely that they would be slightly off. However, Lianping could see through it at a glance. No subordinate could hide it from him. After checking the materials, Lianping began to answer Shi Wen's question. "I'm going to build a nuclear reactor here." Shi Wen was shocked. "Here? But the nuclear power plants in the East Continent are enough for the next 50 years. The materials here are enough to build hundreds of reactors." There was something that Shi Wen didn't say, which was that if Your Majesty made a mistake in the operation here, half of Dongyang would be blown up. Lianping smiled and ignored Shi Wen's shock. The West Continent had been temporarily handed over to Lianping. Unless there was a problem that they couldn't solve, Lianping wouldn't care. What he needed to do next was to improve his strength. Electromagnetic force was the essence of physical strength. Physical strength was just a derivation of electromagnetic force. The nuclear reactor that Lianping built in New Dongyang was to replenish more energy for his body. It was too slow for him to strengthen the electromagnetic force in his body with his own strength. To further perfect the electromagnetic force in his body, he needed more electrons and energy. The superposition of the abilities of Black and the Queen of Sky, together with the knowledge that mankind had accumulated over thousands of years, allowed Lianping to walk on his own path of strength. Chapter 350. In the Valley of New Eastern Sun, Lianping was operating all kinds of materials by himself, building nuclear reactors. All kinds of materials were dancing in the air, transforming and reassembling. It looked like a construction site that had been sped up 100 times. Over 20 reactors were being built by Lianping at the same time. During the construction process, Lianping began to think about the demons and his own strength at the same time. According to the information Lianping obtained from Higram and Gabu, from the 5th energy level onwards, the difference in strength between each energy level would become greater and greater. It could be said to be like the difference between heaven and earth. Because every species and individual had different abilities, their strength, speed, destructive power, defensive power, distance, recovery power, and other combat attributes were different at each energy level. The only thing that could differentiate their energy levels and widen the decisive difference in combat strength was the experience of the demon race accumulated over countless years. First, the 6th energy level was the same as what Heaven Empress had imagined, a choice between material and spiritual. Turning oneself into a spiritual body like Heaven Empress was walking the path of the spiritual realm. Meanwhile, those like Higram, who had no soul and only had a material body, were walking the path of the material realm. Regardless of which path one took, based on the difference in ability, even if one chose the same path, the result and combat strength would be different. For example, Hygram's race was the evil god race that the Red River King of the 12 demon gods belonged to. This race didn't have a soul after birth, only leaving behind a purely material body that was harder than diamond. Even if they didn't train much, they would still have the strength of the 5th energy level when they reached adulthood. However, the evil god race was very few in number. Including the Red River King, there were no more than 50 of them. If the 5th energy level was to modify the body and retain some of the original creature's characteristics, then the 6th energy level was to completely transform into a different kind of creature, starting a new evolution. It was just like how going from 0 energy level to the 1st energy level required the use of psychic energy. If one wanted to go from the 6th energy level to the 7th energy level, they had to combine their body and ability, completely fusing their psychic energy into their ability, making their body purer and closer to the essence, understanding what their own ability was. As for the 8th energy level, they would use their own ability to obtain immortality. Any creature that reached the 8th energy level would forever be far from death. Unless a creature at the 9th energy level personally made a move, there would be nothing that could kill them. Once you reach the 9th rank, even other ninth-rank creatures won't be able to kill you. Therefore, even though there were only 7 demon gods left in the land of White due to a legendary internal strife, the other 5 demon gods were only sealed, exiled, or temporarily deprived of their powers. However, they definitely wouldn't die. Lianping had always thought that he had killed Black, but that was just a mistake. For example, Black and Gray, in order to prevent themselves from being sealed by other demon gods, they scattered their bodies and banished themselves to many worlds. What Lianping destroyed was only a part of them. After receiving this information, Lianping was even more aware of how terrifying the demons were. As the peak of the White Land, the 7 demon gods were at the 9th energy rank. Their strength was already beyond Hygram's comprehension. In fact, apart from the 12 demon gods, no other creature in the White Land had ever reached the 9th energy rank. After learning about the strength of the demons from Hygram, Lianping was even more certain of one fact. It was impossible for Black or the Queen of Heaven to defeat those demons. He had to carve out a path of his own, a path of power that was even more powerful than the 10 great levels of the demons. It's not impossible, Lianping thought. He listened to Hygram's narration. Although he could imagine how powerful the demons were, they gave him the feeling that they were like the magicians or warriors in novels. Their strength came from their innate talent or from the accumulation of experience. They didn't truly understand and study all the mysteries in a systematic way. They knew how, but didn't know why. What Lianping was doing now, using the spiritual force field and the force field of nothingness as a springboard, relying on his supercomputer-like brain to develop all kinds of applications, benefited from the difference between humans and demons. Knowledge or science, by truly understanding the mysteries of the world, using systematic and scientific methods to increase one's strength, and not the countless years of experience passed down by demons, or the instincts of their bodies. This was the starting point of the superpowers of humans and demons, but it went beyond the category of superpowers and gradually became a new power system, one that might be even more powerful than the 10 great levels. For his first stage, Lianping named it electromagnetic drive. All the activities and reactions of the human body were completed by the electromagnetic force between the molecules. To be able to use the electromagnetic force to push one's physical strength, and even freely control all the reactions in one's body, was the ultimate goal of this stage. Only when one reached electromagnetic drive could one be said to have truly grasped the essence of the human body's strength. In terms of efficiency, through strengthening the electromagnetic force and control of the body's atoms, the efficiency was millions of times higher than simply training the muscles. Even a powerless human would have the strength to move mountains and seas once they reached this stage, and could even control all kinds of reactions in the body to obtain all kinds of inconceivable power. Unfortunately, apart from Lianping himself, there was no way for others to smoothly reach this stage. Be it the nihility force field or the spiritual force field, they were already very rare. What was even rarer was Lianping's brain, which could process the entire body's minute data down to the level of atoms at every moment. The next stage of Lianping's plan was what he called matter recombination. After completing the foundation of using the electromagnetic force to completely control all the atoms in one's body, one could recombine any matter one understood, and even recombine one's entire body in the end. Unlike the original recovery using soul power, it could be recombined purely on one's own. However, the biggest problem was recombining one's brain, or rather, recombining one's consciousness. Lianping still had not come up with a specific solution. But as long as I can reach the stage of freely recombining my consciousness, my combat strength will take a new leap, and I should be able to fight against the 8th level demons. Lianping waved his hand, and a lump of metal turned into liquid in his hand, which was then evenly distributed to the 20 reactors in front of him. As for the third stage after achieving matter recombination, I only have some ideas but no specific plans. Lianping looked at the 20 reactors in front of him and the world in front of him. All kinds of forces, rays, and atoms were reflected in his eyes. I need to understand more knowledge, and understand more of the mysteries of this world. 2 days later, Lianping stayed in New Dongyang, building nuclear reactors and completing the upgrade of his electromagnetic drive, while absorbing all kinds of knowledge and thinking about the next step. In the Western continent, the situation had changed over the past few days. First, the federal government officially announced that the Federation would join the Pan-Continent Alliance, and from then on, it would completely accept the leadership of Dexia's emperor, Lianping. As soon as the news came out, it caused an uproar in all walks of life. People came out to organize demonstrations in cities all over the country, and many large guilds even went on strike to protest the stupid actions of the government. However, they were then ruthlessly suppressed. Dexia Dragonfinch's subordinates were more used to dealing with such things than the virtual numeral service. It was especially so for Bai Xinghe, who used to be an emperor himself. He could not understand the demonstrations and strikes at all. In his eyes, they were the cries of the weak. While the resistance was suppressed, 21 cities in the Federation declared independence at the same time. They all belonged to the 3 families of the anti-capitulationists. Bai Xinghe left the relatively mild work of suppressing the demonstrations and strikes to the virtual numerals service and the federal army. The governance and reform of the government were left to the civil servants sent by Wang Chong. As for himself, he took Xia Laikong, Jin Guang, and Emma to the few cities that declared their independence in person. In the high-speed passenger plane, the 4 of them sat opposite each other. Emma chewed her gum while looking at Bai Xinghe in front of her and said, "Is it necessary? The 4 of us will go together." Bai Xinghe sneered. "Human beings can be very stupid. Sometimes they will fight you for wealth and power even if you put a knife to their neck. This time, I plan to treat it as a deterrent. After all, our target is the entire Western continent. In order to reduce the resistance in the future, let's make it more grand this time." Xia Laikong nodded. "I agree with that. When the time comes, the 4 of us will take action together. However, this city belongs to the House of Florence, so we only need to deal with their people. Don't cause too many casualties among the civilians." While the 3 of them were talking, Jin Guang knocked on the window next to their seats and said, "My lords, they seem to have come to greet us. Should I take action?" "No, I'll do it." Emma walked to the window and looked too. "If the 3 of you take action, chances are that the plane will be destroyed." On the clouds outside the window, 2 missiles were roaring toward the direction of the passenger plane. However, with a snap of Emma's fingers, a teleportation gate suddenly appeared in front of the missiles. One of the missiles instantly entered the gate and appeared in front of the other. The 2 missiles collided and exploded into a large cluster of sparks in the sky. Emma blew a bubble with the gum in her mouth and said, "Done." Bai Xinghe looked at the tablet in his hand. The location of the plane was displayed on it. "All right, we're almost there. It will be dangerous if we get close to the plane. I'll ask the pilot to go back. Let's set off from here." Hearing that, Jin Guang was the first to walk to the door, followed by Xia Laikong. Emma stretched her back and followed them. As the door of the plane opened, a gust of wind blew in. Bai Xinghe shouted, "Let's go. Follow the plan we agreed on earlier." Then, Jin Guang was the first to jump out. Golden aura surged all over his body, and he flew toward the city with his people. Then it was Xiao Yekong's turn. His body was surrounded by several violent streams of air, and his entire body flew out like a tornado. As for Emma, she stepped out of the cabin door and entered the black teleportation gate. In the next moment, she appeared in the sky. Bai Xinghe was the last. He stepped out of the cabin and drew out the original sword of Tatsuka from his waist. The sword vibrated slightly, and as the gravitational force changed, Bai Xinghe was already floating in midair. Then, with a flash, he flew out as well. As the 4 of them moved at high speed, They passed through the clouds in the blink of an eye and arrived in the sky above a huge city. However, as soon as they appeared, countless anti-air cannons and missiles on the ground were already aimed at them. A large number of bullets hit Jin Guang first. However, the silver wrist guards on his hands vibrated slightly and activated the level 5 ability, molecular stagnation, which was one of the 108 swords of Totsuka. Countless bullets exploded on the surface of his body. However, other than slowing down his flying speed, they were unable to cause any harm to him. As for the other 3 level 5 ability users, attacks of this level could not even break through their aura defense. Looking at the densely packed army on the ground, Emma cheered and drew out a silver harp. It was the Harp of Death, one of the 108 swords of Totsuka. As Emma's fingertips slowly plucked the harp strings, terrifying infrasonic waves scattered from the sky to the ground. This terrifying demonic sound, which did not weaken at all, covered most of the soldiers on the ground. No matter if they were hiding behind armor plates or wearing multiple layers of protection, all the soldiers who were hit by the infrasonic waves instantly fell to the ground and could not get up. More than half of the soldiers were wiped out without destroying any buildings. Infrasonic waves were indeed very useful in modern warfare. However, with Emma's attack, there was indeed a great disturbance among the enemy's ground troops. But soon, over 10 ability users who could fly soared into the sky from the crowd and headed toward the 4 of them. Bai Xinghe glanced at the ability users and said directly, "I'll go and capture the head of the Florence family and the elders first. You guys go and wipe out all the rebels." After saying that, he did not wait for Jin Guang and the others to reply. With a flash, he accelerated and flew away. Xia Likong glanced at Bai Xinghe's back. Bai Xinghe had already turned into a small black dot. Xia Likong smiled and said, "He really likes to fight. Is he going to directly challenge the strongest?" Although Bai Xinghe had volunteered to become Li Anping's subordinate, his pursuit of power and his preference for fighting against the strong had not changed. After glancing at Bai Xinghe, Xia Likong turned to look at the ability users on the other side. His eyes were already filled with cold light. "Then let's speed up a little as well." The next moment, a bolt of lightning suddenly appeared in the clouds. A storm suddenly swept through the originally calm sky. Amidst the flashing lightning and rumbling thunder, several tornadoes that were over 100 meters thick rushed toward the ability users who were charging over and the remaining troops on the ground. 5 hours later, the Florence family and the 6 cities that they had taken over had all fallen. Not a single member of the family of 203 was spared. The head of the family, Casa Florence, had his fair and plump body chopped into thousands of pieces by Bai Xinghe's extreme punishment. This caused a great uproar in the entire Western continent. Chapter 351. Bai Xinghe's operation greatly reduced the number of people who were rioting in the Federation. But for the diehards, it only intensified the conflict between the 2 parties. In the following days, the 2 parties had more than 10 conflicts in the Federation. However, faced with Bai Xinghe, Xia Likong, Emma, Woody, and Judy, who were all level 5 experts, the resistance army was forced to retreat and almost collapsed. In only 4 days, Bai Xinghe had conquered 21 cities and caused the death of more than 200 aptitude users. More than 5,000 soldiers of the resistance army were sacrificed. The failure on the battlefield forced the resistance forces of the Federation to unite. Even many foreign forces in the Western continent were dissatisfied with Li Anping's tyranny and began to sponsor the resistance army from various sources. On the 5th night of the war, the resistance army finally resorted to their last resort. A nuclear bomb with a yield of more than 10 million was launched at Warrenburg, the largest city in the east of the Federation, causing more than 2 million casualties. Emma, the target of the nuclear bomb, was Xia Dragonfinch. Although she managed to avert the disaster in the end, she was still covered in dust. The leadership of Xia, especially Bai Xinghe, was infuriated. He ordered the confiscation of all the nuclear bombs in the Federation. The huge casualties caused by the almost terrorist attack shocked the whole world. Alexander, the current highest leader of the resistance army, was criticized by the media. Therefore, Bai Xinghe's methods became more and more unscrupulous. While a large number of civilians were sacrificed, the space for the resistance army's activities was greatly reduced. On the 7th day of the war, the remaining 2,000 people of the resistance army and their leader, Alexander, were driven to the Yarrow Plain in the west of the Federation by Bai Xinghe. Bai Xinghe, Xia Likong, Emma, Woody, and Judy took action together and finally launched the final encirclement of the resistance army. The blast that spread for several kilometers swept across the Yarrow Plain like a storm. Facing the 5/5 energy rank ability users, the resistance army had no way of resisting. On the plain, Woody looked at the tanks that were firing at him non-stop. He was not moved at all. Several armor-piercing bullets were blocked by his psychic energy before they could reach him. Beside him, Judy Arnold didn't use any ability either. She only used her psychic energy to protect herself. Only when the rebels got too close to her would she use her psychic energy to crush their heads. As for the tanks that ran away after firing a few shots, she couldn't even be bothered to chase after them. Although the two of them had joined Lianping, they were obviously unwilling to kill their former colleagues. As for why, the two of them might have different reasons. At this moment, Judith suddenly covered his ears with one hand. The news from the headset made him frown. Alexander has been caught. Hearing this, Woody sighed and looked at the end of the plane in front of him with some loneliness. In front of Bai Xinghe was a room that was soaked in blood. All kinds of soldiers, aptitude users, and high-level officials had been cut into countless pieces by him with the sword of Tatsuka. The whole room was like a slaughterhouse. In front of him was an old man with white hair. He was sitting on a chair, and did not seem to notice the bloody scene in front of him at all. Instead, he seemed to be looking at Bai Xinghe with a cold smile, as if he were the victor. Bai Xinghe frowned and pointed his saber at Alexander. Do you have anything else to say? Don't worry. I won't kill you immediately. After I bring you back, you'll be of more use. Alexander laughed wildly. Do you think you've won? He looked at the level 5 aptitude user in front of him with a mocking expression. While you're wasting your time here, all 33 phase bombs have been fired 500 kilometers away. Let's die together. Hearing Alexander's words, Bai Xinghe said in disbelief, That's impossible. All the nuclear weapons of the Federation should have been recovered by us. Halfway through his words, the news from the headset made his expression change. After a sniff, Bai Xinghe knocked Alexander out with his palm and rushed out of the room with him. The 3-phase bomb was a hydrogen bomb whose energy release process was fission, fusion, and fission. Because of the virtuous cycle of nuclear fusion and fission, it boasted the power of both a hydrogen bomb and an atomic bomb. However, while it was powerful, the 3-phase bomb was also a dirty bomb. After the explosion, the radioactive particles would spread into the air and cause serious radioactive pollution. More seriously, if the 3-phase bombs were detonated in other countries, a chain reaction of nuclear bombs would be triggered. The whole Earth might be caught in a terrible nuclear winter. In the valley of New Dongyang, Yang Guang rushed out of the Thunderbird 3 carrier and ran toward where Lianping was. Because they did not know the plan of the mental network, they all thought that they had to go to Lianping in person if they wanted to contact him. In front of Yang Guang, there were all kinds of instruments that he could not recognize at all. The valley that was supposed to be a paradise seemed to have turned into a super-modern laboratory at this moment. Even the ground had been completely covered in metal and cement. In the deepest part of the instruments, Lianping, who was surrounded by electric arcs, was floating in the air with his legs crossed. In front of him were countless flashing screens. However, when Yang Guang was about to rush over, a gentle force pushed him back. In the meantime, the air in front of him suddenly twisted. Then, as countless tiny particles of different colors changed, Lianping appeared in front of him. Yang Guang looked at Lianping in front of him in a daze, and then at Lianping, who was floating in midair and surrounded by electric arcs. It's just a virtual projection. The Lianping in front of him moved his mouth, and a voice was transmitted into Yang Guang's ears through the vibrations in the air. It's just a simple interference and diffraction of light with the help of some lasers. After a brief explanation, he looked at Yang Guang's confused face and said calmly, "What's the matter?" Yang Guang swallowed. For some reason, the Lianping in front of him made him feel a chill in his heart. However, he still remembered his mission. He opened his mouth and said, "Your Majesty, the rebels of the Federation have launched 33 phase missiles. Bai Xinghe and the rest have tried their best to stop them, but 19 three-phase missiles were successfully launched. They are flying towards several countries in the Western continent and the Eastern continent. They hope to receive your support." After Yang Guang finished speaking, he was very nervous. Although they were very confident in Lianping's strength, they were not 100% sure that he could stop the catastrophe in front of them. "Got it." When he heard the three-phase missiles, Lianping frowned, but his expression did not change much. It was as if he had heard that his kitten or puppy was relieving itself on the bed. Although he was not happy about it, he was not worried. Lianping's eyes flashed with electric arcs. The next moment, high-frequency electromagnetic waves moving at the speed of light swept across the entire planet's surface and 36,000 kilometers above it in 125 seconds. 19. Found them. Chapter 352. Valley in New Dongyang. Lianping's body was constantly improving his strength under the electric current that was enough to supply the entire continent. Electromagnetic drive is almost complete. The next step is material recombination. If I want to be able to compete with those demons, I have to achieve material reorganization or even the next stage of power. During this period of time, in addition to learning all kinds of knowledge and improving his electromagnetic power, Lianping's psychic avatar had also inquired more and more about the demons from Higram. The other party's strength was stronger than he had previously estimated. In front of Lianping's eyes, a formula appeared on the screen. The formula's content was as follows: psi 8 pi caret 2 mh caret 2 ev psi equals 0. This was the famous wave function equation in the scientific world. It represented the wave nature of matter. It was simple, elegant, and classic. On the other screen next to Lianping, there were table-like squares and another formula: PQ/QP equals H2 pi I. This was the content of matrix mechanics, which was more inclined to the particle nature of matter. It was complex, profound, and completely mathematically observed the world. Was matter a wave or a particle? In the past, this was a topic that had lasted for hundreds of years in the scientific world. But now, there was already a conclusion that it was both a wave and a particle. Lianping wanted to be able to reorganize matter at will, and the wave-particle duality was a foundation. He could use electromagnetic force to manipulate molecules, atoms, and electrons on a macroscopic scale. But to complete material reorganization, he had to enter the microscopic world, a bizarre world full of wonderful ideas, the world of quantum mechanics. Before an electron is observed, it's always in a superimposed state, diffusing in the entire space in the form of a wave function. It can appear in any position of a composite wave function. Only when I observe him will he collapse, turning into a point in a probabilistic manner of a composite wave function. This is one of the fundamental moments of quantum mechanics, uncertainty. But even I can't observe the state of the electron before it collapses. This isn't a problem of observation methods, but a theoretical limitation. But what is observation? Is it the so-called consciousness? Thinking up to this point, Li Anping felt that he had returned to the end point of material reorganization and consciousness reorganization. What exactly was consciousness? At this moment, the doctor in the central city had already started to contact the Heavenly Queen's clone, and the Heavenly Queen's clone transmitted the information to Li Anping's brain through a mental connection. Your Majesty, can we start today's test? Li Anping did not answer. Instead, he asked, Doctor, what do you think consciousness is? It doesn't have to be philosophical, but from a physical perspective. Consciousness. The doctor was stunned for a moment, but he immediately gave his opinion. The so-called consciousness comes from the brain, right? And the closest thing to a brain in this world is probably a computer made by humans. The doctor smiled and pushed down the glasses on his nose bridge. The so-called consciousness might be a special structure that creates an extremely complicated set of algorithms and rules. Just like a computer, it can obtain different outputs based on different input. The reason why the human brain is different from a computer is that the algorithms of the human brain are countless times more complicated. This allows the human brain to have a strong learning ability and be able to continuously increase its intelligence. It's just like clones. Although we're unable to create a brain, we can clone them. Facts have proven that clones also have consciousness. Then do you think that after disassembling and reassembling a brain, it would still be the same person? Faced with Li Anping's question, the doctor gave it some thought but did not give an answer. In the glass container, the Heavenly Queen's clone moved her lips and said calmly, Forget it, let's continue with today's test. We might be able to find the answer from the mental network test. The doctor nodded and started to operate the equipment next to him. At the next moment, the clone's mental energy field spread out in all directions. Correspondingly, thousands of clones in the central capital also released their spiritual force fields, covering the entire city center with their spiritual force field. Nie Xian walked out of the subway and looked at the pedestrians coming and going on the street. It seemed that everyone had a knowing smile on their faces. However, he could only feel a chill in his heart. Since half a month ago, an unknown change had occurred in the central city. Yes, unknown, because only Nie Xian could sense it. No one knew when, but there were no beggars on the street. Everyone you met on the road greeted you with a smile. In the company, from the sweeping auntie to the CEO, everyone was working hard and learning. It was as if they had become characters in a novel. They were kind, upright, enthusiastic, and intelligent. But the more they were like this, the more strange it made Nie Xian feel. Nie Xian saw with his own eyes that the swindler who had cheated him of his money actually personally delivered the money to him and apologized to him, while crying bitterly. What made Nie Xian feel even more horrified was that there seemed to be a lock in everyone's mind, including his. As long as they left the central city, they would completely forget about the abnormalities that happened here. He tried to leave the central city through the space warp gate many times, but in the end, he felt that he had inexplicably returned. What's wrong with this world? Nie Xian felt that he seemed to be more and more incompatible with this world. Hi, Nie Xian, what are you thinking about? A beautiful white-collar urban woman patted Nie Xian's shoulder from behind. Mary, good morning. Nie Xian looked at the mature beauty in front of him nervously. This was his boss in the company. She was famous for being strict and picky, but now she was greeting him like a big sister next door. Nie Xian, you haven't been focused on your work recently. Is there a problem at home? Nie Xian looked at the beauty in front of him who was concerned about him. His eyes accidentally glanced at the unfathomable snow-white chest of the other party. He muttered, "Oh my Buddha," in his heart, but he replied, "It's nothing, I just didn't sleep well." Mary smiled sweetly, "That's good. I know you live alone. If you have any difficulties, feel free to call me." Seeing Mary's pretty back, Nie Xian gulped. There's a problem, there's definitely a problem. At this moment, A harsh sound rang out in his mind. Nyexan rubbed his forehead and said in a deep voice, "It's coming again." This was a sound that only he could hear after the mutation. It was like an ear-piercing chirp that was rolling in his mind. What was even stranger was that he was the only one who could hear this sound. No one else seemed to be able to feel it at all. Usually, Nyexan would silently endure this chirp in his mind, but today, for some reason, his curiosity was aroused. Perhaps it was the need to vent after many days of suppression, or perhaps it was the fear of the changes in the world. Today, he decided to take a look in the direction of the chirp. He turned around and returned to the subway station. Looking at the pedestrians around him, everyone's face was filled with happy smiles. He felt a chill down his spine. The chirp in his mind seemed to be getting more and more intense. Nyexan took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention and quietly walked onto the subway tracks, walking along the tracks towards the depths of the central city. As he went deeper and deeper, the chirp in his mind became more and more intense. "Close, it's just in front." Nyexan pressed his aching head. "I want to see what it is." At this moment, Nyexan walked in front of an iron door. This seemed to be a passage used by the subway maintenance staff. Nyexan was hesitating on how to open the door when the iron door opened by itself. Following the curved corridor, Nyexan carefully walked in. After about 100 meters, a huge glass container appeared in front of him. A beautiful blonde girl was soaked in the container with her eyes closed, as if she was sleeping. Nyexan looked at the girl's beautiful face and was stunned. But in the next moment, a taser gun directly hit his back, causing him to twitch and faint on the ground. The doctor pushed his glasses and muttered, "Mental force field doesn't seem to have any effect on him. It's probably a special ability." The clone in the container opened her eyes. There was an icy expression on her beautiful face. He looked at Nyexan on the ground and said, "The parameters of the personality adjustment are too high. Maybe we should try to customize the adjustment according to each person's habits, but the range of adjustment shouldn't be too high." The doctor nodded and said, "As long as your computing power can support it, it's fine. But because of the grudges, I don't think we should abruptly remove the hatred coefficient. We should slowly reduce it. Readjust it and proceed to the next stage of the test. Strive to be able to promote the mental network on a large scale within this month." And just as the world of the Eastern continent was rapidly changing, the final battle of the Western continent's unification war had finally begun. Chapter 353. 25 days had passed since the war started in the Western continent. Tyrol's crevice. It was located in a canyon that was more than 2,000 meters deep. This was the headquarters of Tyrol's national organization, the Annihilation Abyss. However, the crevice was now completely engulfed in flames. Shouts and explosions could be heard everywhere. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Several blades flashed, and the wall in front of him was cut into pieces. Bai Xinghe held the sword of Tatsuka in his right hand and walked incautiously. However, there was only a man who had been shot in the head sitting in the office of the highest commander of the Annihilation Abyss. Bai Xinghe placed the sword of Tatsuka under the man's chin and lifted his head up. "Mephisto." The man's face looked exactly like the commander of the Annihilation Abyss, Tyrol's strongest level 5 ability user, Mephisto. However, judging from the traces at the scene, this man had committed suicide. Suicide with a pistol? A level 5 ability user? Bai Xinghe did not believe this at all. He waved his hand and called in a group of workers outside the wall. "Take his body out and dissect it. Run tests and DNA tests. In short, let me know his identity." "Yes, sir." A few workers walked in and began to take photos and check the scene. After they were done, they moved the body out. Bai Xinghe also walked out and looked at the cliff of the deep canyon. Balls of fire lit up from time to time. The Xia Dragonfinch's attack on the Annihilation Abyss was too easy. It was so easy that Bai Xinghe felt that something was wrong. It was not just this attack on the Annihilation Abyss. Ever since he led the army to attack Tyrol, he felt that something was wrong. It was not that the opponent resisted, but that it was too easy. Tyrol's performance was just like those small third-rate countries from before. No, it was even weaker. Their military was not even fully equipped, their command was chaotic, and their ability users were few and far between. Until now, Bai Xinghe had not met a single level 5 ability user. Did they all escape? Bai Xinghe frowned and thought. At this moment, a dragon sparrow guard handed a communicator to him. Sir, it's Sir Xia Laikong. Bai Xinghe took it and asked, How's the palace? Tyrol's royal family has all been captured. Xia Laikong paused for a moment before continuing, but I think something is wrong? Yes. Xia Laikong looked at the members of the royal family who were being escorted into the transport plane and frowned. I'm afraid this is a scheme to escape. The people in charge of Tyrol are probably hiding in the shadows. It's not as simple as that. Coldness flashed in Bai Xinghe's eyes. They also took away a lot of equipment and assets. What are they trying to do? If you resist, it would be better to use your own country as your base. If you give up so easily, even if you hide in the dark, you will only be at an infinite disadvantage. Bai Xinghe sneered. Unless they are certain that they will fail. Regardless of how the Battle of Tyrol went down, the news of Tyrol's defeat was announced to the world a day later. Although none of the countries in the western continent had been destroyed, they had all been forced to join Li Anping's Pan-Continent Alliance and accept his management. The world was in an uproar at this moment. A new era was about to begin on Earth. Li Anping sat cross-legged and floated in the valley. Electric currents pierced through the air around him and emitted rays of light at a frequency that was in the visible band of human light. These rays of light were reflected on the ground. One moment they were circles of light waves, and the next moment they were dense clusters of light spots. Li Anping had temporarily given up on the realistic explanation of randomness in quantum mechanics. Instead, he directly applied these theories. In this way, although he still could not change the chemical properties of matter by changing the structure of atomic nuclei and electrons, he could achieve the effect of recombination of matter simply by restricting the arrangement of atoms. The electric currents in the air gradually dissipated. Li Anping stretched out his right hand. The next moment, his right hand disintegrated like a cloud of mist. From his skin to his muscles, then to his nerves and bones, everything turned into the most basic atomic state and spread out in the air in a form that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. Li Anping raised his disappearing right arm. At the next moment, as if something was created out of nothing, the disappearing parts reassembled. First, it was the bones, followed by the nerves, muscles, and other substances. After the recombination of matter is completed, it'll be the transition from electromagnetic forces to strong mutual forces and weak mutual forces. After that, it'll be the spinning field and zero-point vacuum energy. As Li Anping was still unable to solve the theoretical problem of consciousness recombination, he decided to try his best to do what he could to increase his battle prowess during the stage of matter recombination. 1 second later, Li Anping's right arm had completely regenerated. However, a hint of dissatisfaction appeared on his face. The amount of calculation and control required to recombine matter through the arrangement of atoms was far too complicated. Even he was still very unfamiliar with it. Judging from the appearance of the right arm before him, it was exactly the same as his arm in the past. It was as if he had completely succeeded. However, when he wanted to exert force, he realized that his right arm could no longer move at all. The recombination this time around was a complete failure. Therefore, this right arm once again disintegrated and then reassembled. Li Anping could only continuously familiarize himself with this kind of recombination and familiarize himself with the process of recombination. While he was trying out the combination of these arms, Li Anping glanced at Bai Xinghe, Xia Laikong, Jean Guang, Emma, Woody, and Judy, who were all half kneeling on the ground in front of him. "Have you finished dealing with the matters in the Western continent?" Bai Xinghe withdrew his gaze from Roland's arm and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, all the countries in the Western continent have joined the Pan-Continental Alliance and are willing to accept our leadership. However, although we defeated Tyrol this time, something doesn't seem right. The whole process of attacking them this time was too easy. Even though we found a few of their level 5 ability users, as well as the corpses of the emperors and members of the royal family, I feel like they might be clones or substitutes. The real ones might be hiding, wanting to fight against us in the dark." The people on the side looked at Li Anping's right hand that kept disappearing and reappearing. They did not show any special expressions. Only Xia Laikong, who could also control electric currents, had a trace of doubt in his eyes. He felt that there was something special about it. After hearing Bai Xinghe's report, Li Anping said, "Tell the public that they have all been executed. You will continue to be in charge of this matter and find them all." "What about Violet?" Bai Xinghe lowered his head and said, "We have confiscated all their bases and companies. As for those..." He could not think of a good way to describe Li Anping's clones, so he could only say vaguely, "Those clones have all been destroyed. However, we can't find any information about the Federal Grand Canyon in their database." However, Li Anping did not care about his clones. After all, those clones were too weak compared to him. In comparison, he was more concerned about the strangeness in the Federal Grand Canyon. "Can't find it?" "Yes. According to the person in charge, we couldn't find the place where the information was supposed to be stored. It was as if someone had destroyed it. However, we couldn't find any related records. The specific storage device has been sent to Tianjin. Momo is checking it personally." "Got it." Li Anping's right hand flashed with blue electric light. His arm appeared like a projection. It had been reconstructed. This time, he clenched his fist and felt a surge of strength. "Continue to investigate the Federal Grand Canyon. Also, Tyrol and Violet, see if there is any connection between them." "Yes." Bai Xinghe nodded. Xia Laikong reminded him, "Your Majesty, there will be a ceremony of the Pan-Continent Alliance in 5 days. To celebrate the close union of all the countries of mankind, all the countries will send their highest leaders to attend the ceremony. Wang Chong and the others hope that you can go, too." Li Anping nodded and stood up in midair. "Tell him that I will go." He knew that since the entire human world had been united, it was time for him to carry out his next plan. It was a good opportunity for him to meet the leaders. Perhaps it was time for him to reveal the existence of the demons and the White Land to them. Chapter 354. In Tianjin, in the temporary campus of Academy City, there were many people coming and going today. It seemed to be very busy. Because today was the day of the takeoff of Academy City's headquarters, the Sky Academy. Since 2 weeks ago, all the students and teachers in Academy City had gradually transported all kinds of materials to the Sky Academy. Although Fang Haojie was a graduate of this year, he could still live there for a while before he graduated this year. Thinking of the luxurious facilities in the Sky Academy, his eyes showed a trace of envy and jealousy. Those juniors in the future are so happy. Just as Fang Haojie was thinking about this, the surrounding male and female students started running quickly without him noticing. Just when Fang Haojie was wondering what had happened, his phone rang. "Hello, Haojie." A vigorous female voice came from the phone. "Where are you? Don't you know? Come to the takeoff ceremony quickly." "What's wrong?" Fang Haojie frowned and said, "What's wrong with the Sky Academy?" However, he heard the female voice say excitedly, "Your Majesty! Your Majesty is here to attend the takeoff ceremony of the Sky Academy." "What?" Fang Haojie said in surprise. "But hasn't Your Majesty been cultivating behind closed doors recently? He didn't even participate in the unification battle of the Western continent." The girl on the other side shouted, "This time, Your Majesty originally came to attend the summit of the Alliance's highest leaders. It was Vice President Lu Xing who invited him to attend the takeoff ceremony of the Sky Academy. In the end, he really came. In short, hurry over. There won't be a front row seat if you're late." Without waiting for the other side to finish, Fang Haojie had already hung up the phone. However, when he arrived at the scene of the takeoff ceremony, more than 100 seats in the front row had already been taken. The remaining students could only stand in the back row and squeeze together. "Sorry, take this." Fang Haojie had no choice but to use his psychic energy and slowly squeeze up from the back row. The students of Academy City were naturally ability users. When they saw someone trying to squeeze in with psychic energy, they were naturally unwilling. However, just as they were about to fight back, when they turned their heads and saw Fang Haojie, their faces suddenly changed. When they were hesitating whether to move aside, Fang Haojie had already walked to the front. Fang Haojie was one of the most outstanding graduates in this year's batch. His prestige in the school was obviously not ordinary. After all, unlike normal schools, the students in Academy City had to be strong if they wanted to get good grade. Just as Fang Haojie was squeezing and smiling at the people who were pushed aside, a girl in the front row stood up and waved at him. "Haojie, over here." After a series of squeezes and greetings, Fang Haojie finally sat down. "Phew, I finally squeezed in." The short-haired girl giggled and said, "We're brothers, aren't we? I didn't even save a spot for Raphael." "Thank you, Vivian," Fang Haojie said excitedly. "I didn't expect His Majesty to come here personally. He didn't even come to the opening ceremony last time." Vivian patted Fang Haojie on the shoulder and said, "Well, I know you are an NC fan. Don't be so excited." At this moment, the two people's vision suddenly darkened. The whole world suddenly turned dark, and they couldn't even see their own fingers. No, it wasn't that they couldn't see their own fingers. It was that they had completely lost their light source. It was to the point where they couldn't see anything with the naked eye. The scene instantly became chaotic. Fang Haojie and Vivian stood back to back. Without saying a word, their psychic energy mixed together and spread out in all directions. In the next second, Fang Haojie's body shook, and he quickly turned his head to look at the stage. Even though his vision was still dark, there was still a trace of surprise in his eyes. Other than them, the people present had different reactions. Some were panicking, some wanted to run away, some immediately used their abilities to hide, and some released light to freeze the scene. However, in the next moment, the light returned to everyone's eyes, and in this short period of darkness, two men appeared on the stage. Li Anping and Lu Xing. When they saw Li Anping appear on the stage, there was a burst of exclamations from the crowd. However, before they could continue, Li Anping opened his mouth. His calm voice was intentionally amplified by the vibrations in the air, and it covered everyone's voices. "Just now was a greeting from me to you." Li Anping glanced at all the students present and said, "I let Lu Xing temporarily take away your vision. I want to see how you will react." After Li Anping said this, the scene quieted down. A few students who had directly rushed out of the arena, and a few who had directly drilled into the ground or hid themselves, all returned to the arena with awkward expressions. Li Anping's gaze didn't look at them, but slightly paused on Fang Haojie and the other 4 students present. It's a pity that in the 2-second surprise attack, only 5 of the 300 students present discovered Lu Xing and me. To be honest, I'm a bit disappointed. When Li Anping finished this sentence, most of the students present showed a look of shame. Some people did not take it seriously, and some people had a look of indignation in their eyes, thinking that they were just not prepared. You are all ability users, students of Academy City, which means that you are the best in the whole of Desya, or even the whole of the Eastern continent. Most of you will join Desya Dragonfinch after graduation. In other people's eyes, your life experience is like a golden path. Lianping paused, then continued, now that the Earth has been unified, and the war is over, all you need to do is study hard and work hard in Academy City. I'm afraid most of you think the same, but I want to tell you that you're wrong. The war is far from over. Lianping looked at everyone present and said, Academy City is the cradle of the elite. Every student here has the best talent in the human race, and you have only one responsibility in the future, which is to protect the human race. As the most elite ability users of the human race, what awaits you in the future is the most dangerous position. Your enemies may have all kinds of incredible abilities, and visual deprivation like today is just one of the most common. Maybe in the reunion 10 years later, only 1/10 of you will be able to make it. The only thing you can rely on is wisdom and hard work. I hope you can always be vigilant and never lose your pursuit of power. After saying this, Lianping nodded at Lu Xing, leaving the scene to him. Lianping, surrounded by a few dragon sparrow guards, walked to the car. In the next few days, he would participate in the summit of the Pan-Continent Alliance's highest leaders, setting the tone for the development of the human race on Earth. The students at the scene spontaneously applauded and watched Lianping leave. Many students took out their mobile phones and began to take photos of Lianping's position. Today, Lianping's speech in the Sky Academy was also posted on major websites and media, causing widespread discussion. Some people disagreed, and some people felt that Lianping did a good job. However, only a small number of people noticed the war that Lianping mentioned and associated it with the monsters that caused chaos in the Western continent before. They had a bad feeling in their hearts. On the night of the Sky Academy's takeoff, in the mountains south of Desya, a mountain village boy was sitting at home, looking at the newspaper in his hand. The content of the newspaper was about today's Academy City and the summit meeting of the Alliance. The boy's father walked in with a shoulder pull. Looking at the boy's serious look, he said casually, "Xining, are you reading the newspaper? Something big happened recently?" The boy named Su Xining raised his head and said excitedly, "The Sky Academy took off, and the Emperor went to give a speech." "The Sky Academy? Is that the school that can fly in the sky?" The father thought about it, and his face was full of surprise. "It can fly just like that? It was only built a year ago, right?" "That's not it," Su Xining said proudly. "I heard that the Emperor personally took action and greatly reduced the time." Just as the father and son were talking about national affairs, Su Xining's mother came out of the kitchen, holding a bowl and chopsticks, and said, Okay, go and help me bring the dishes. If there's anything, let's eat first." Two little boys and girls, who were only 8 or 9 years old, followed behind their mother and brought out the meal from the kitchen. Su Xining and his father also stepped forward to help set up the table. There were a total of 3 dishes, 1 soup, and a big pot of rice. The family's dinner began. While eating, the 3 children talked about what happened at school today, and the parents talked about the village. This was the only time the family could communicate every day. Su Xining's sister said, "Dandan said that his brother went to Jadeite City to take an exam last week and was accepted by the school with special abilities. Today, he even came to school to give us candy to eat." When he heard his sister's words, Su Xining's face darkened. His father, who was standing to the side, picked up a large amount of food with his chopsticks and gave it to his sister. "Eating so much can't stop your mouth." His sister sneaked a glance at Su Xining's face and then reacted. She didn't say anything else and just kept eating. His brother, Su Xining, had always been the top student in school. 2 months ago, he also went to Jadeite City to take the exam for the school with special abilities. However, He was told that he didn't have any abilities and wasn't accepted. The school with special abilities in Jadeite City was opened by the 9 royal families and was one of the only 10 schools in Desya. Their test results were basically a death sentence for Su Xining on the path of having special abilities. Looking at her son's ugly face, his mother comforted him. "It's okay. If you don't have special abilities, then so be it. Wait until you graduate from high school and go to university. Look at Wei from the neighboring village, isn't he doing well? I heard that his monthly salary is over 10,000 yuan. Seeing his parents comforting him together and thinking about what he saw in the newspaper today, Su Xining raised his head and looked at his father with determination. "Dad, I want to go to Tianjin." Instantly, the whole table quieted down. His father put down his bowl and chopsticks and said with a frown, "Why do you want to go to Tianjin? I saw the newspaper today. The newspaper said that Academy City opened a specialization to teach ancient abilities. The registration requirement is that you have to pass the aptitude test. You don't have to be an ability user." While speaking, Su Xining lowered his head. "I want to try again." Hearing his son's words, his mother was the first to object. "Dewa, we're all normal people. As long as you live a peaceful life, I'll be at ease. It's okay if you don't have special abilities." Su Xining raised his head and said excitedly, "I want to try again. I think it might work." "Why are you so disobedient?" His mother wanted to persuade him again, but his father coughed and said, "Okay, Xining. After failing the test in Jadeite City, I knew that you wouldn't give up. If you want to go, you can." He waved his hand to stop his mother, who still wanted to say something. He looked at Su Xining and said, "But if you still fail this time, then don't waste time trying again. Come back and study hard." "Okay." Su Xining nodded heavily, but his 2 fists under the table were clenched until they turned white. Chapter 355. Let's end the issue regarding Sikot here. In the conference room, Wang Chong looked at the more than 300 representatives from all over the world, representing more than 150 countries, and said, "As for the division of borders, we'll follow the results of the discussion just now." He raised his head and looked at Lianping's seat. When he saw the other party nod, he continued, "The next issue is regarding the distribution of the world's aptitude users." Although the entire world was now under Lianping's rule, there were still many issues and conflicts between countries and regions that needed to be resolved one by one. However, because of Lianping's absolute suppression, such issues were all resolved by the government of Desya. As time passed, the alliance would gradually reduce the influence of the governments of various countries, making them a part of the alliance and become Lianping's tentacles in every corner of the world. The issue regarding aptitude users was even more so. As an important fighting force in the human world, from now on, all aptitude users in the world had to register their information with the Alliance and accept work assignments from the Alliance under the premise of seeking their own consent. As for the strategy of aptitude user schools, they would first learn from Desya's current method. Every country could set up 1 or 2 aptitude user schools to be responsible for training aptitude users. As for Desya's 10 aptitude user schools, they would also expand their enrollment to the entire world. As for the graduates of the various schools, apart from the government, the military, and the police, aptitude users with strong combat abilities would have 2 choices. Desya Dragonfinch in the Eastern Continent and the Imaginary Organization in the Western Continent. They would be by Xinghe and Judy Arnold respectively. As for Lu Xing, who was originally in charge of Desya Dragonfinch, under Lianping's inquiry, he would become the general director of Desya's 10 aptitude user schools. Due to Lianping's full support, these 10 aptitude user schools would probably become the top aptitude user schools in the entire human world, and Academy City would be the top of the top. Apart from this, Li Anping also decided to establish a special ability user unit to cooperate with the military. This unit would be called the Human Armed Forces and would be led by Xia Likong. Compared to the imaginary number service and the Xia Dragonfinch, they were more inclined to cooperate with the army to prepare for the battle between humans and demons in the future. Of course, there were still many issues that the entire human race needed to be unified. Economy, law, race. There were too many things that needed to be considered. Li Anping naturally did not intend to waste all his time on this. He only came up with a general strategy, which required that the original situation of those countries be respected as much as possible under the circumstances of unification. As for the remaining matters, they were naturally left to the civil officials. The meeting went on until 9 o'clock in the evening. A man suddenly walked up to Wang Chong and whispered something in his ear. His expression changed as he looked at the already tired people below the stage and said, "Everyone, regarding the remaining topics, we will continue to discuss them tomorrow. Next, His Majesty will give us a few words." Wang Chong's words immediately woke everyone up from their tiredness. Amidst the applause, Li Anping slowly walked onto the stage. Everyone stared at the strongest human on the stage, the unprecedented emperor. They were thinking about what the other party would say. Would it be related to what Li Anping said in Academy City this morning? Everyone, what I'm about to say next might be related to the survival of humanity. Li Anping clapped his hands. The next moment, a holographic image appeared behind him. It was the image and information of Li Anping's battle with Gray in New Dongyang, as well as the video of Li Anping's battle with Haigram in the Western continent. Although most of the people present had heard about these two battles, it was the first time they had seen such comprehensive information. As you can see, in the past 2 years, I've fought against these non-human creatures twice. These creatures call themselves demons. They were born in a universe called the White Land. They can travel to other universes through something called the World Crossing Gate. The video of Haigram destroying an entire city with a wave of his hand appeared before everyone's eyes. And now they've discovered Earth. I've captured this demon called Haigram. From what he said, I can confirm that the next wave of attacks from the demons will happen in 12 to 18 months. This is the information I received last month. In other words, in 17 months at most, we will have to face these demons. Li Anping's words obviously shocked everyone present, but he had already planned to tell the majority of the information about the demons to unite the power of humanity. With his absolute military might, the entire human world had been unified. Now that the demons were in danger, not only would he be able to divert the internal conflicts of the unified human world away, he would also be able to effectively unite them, allowing humans to erupt with even greater power in this crisis. This demon named Haigram has the ability of the 7th rank. Li Anping pointed at the picture of Haigram behind him and said, "Yes, you didn't hear wrong. The demon's abilities are divided into 10 levels. This Haigram with 7th level ability, if I'm not included, is enough to wipe out the entire human world. In the White Land there are many demons stronger than him. The strongest 12 of them are called the 12 demon gods. All of them have reached the 9th level. Fortunately, there are only 7 of them left." A black representative stood up and looked at Li Anping's gaze. Although he was a bit scared and nervous, he still said, "Your Majesty, I'm not doubting you, but how do we know that this so-called demon, Haigram, is telling the truth?" "You're right." Under Li Anping's control, the holographic projection behind him quickly changed, and a lot of information about Gray was displayed. Above everyone's head was a 3D projection of Gray. Above Gray was the scene of the entire New Dongyang. The name of this behemoth is Ash, also known as the world-destroying behemoth. It's one of the 12 demon gods that have been exiled. However, the one in New Dongyang is only a small part of its body. However, this small part has already formed a human country, Dongyang. Following Li Anping's manipulation, Gray's holographic image was zoomed in at high speed. It was as if people had descended from the sky and landed on Gray's skin, followed by his various organs and the various monsters that resided within his skin and organs. This is a 3D model of Gray's body made by the Royal Academy of Sciences. As you can see, his body is not only enormous, but it also contains enough energy to destroy the entire Earth. If any of the parasites in his body were to wander uncontrollably into human society, it would cause a huge disaster. They are now in New Dongyang. If you need evidence, you can go and take a look at them at any time. Do you think there should be such creatures on Earth? The people in the audience looked at the holographic image in front of them and the various written reports about Gray. Their faces were full of disbelief. Whether it was the demons, Gray, or Hygram, their real existence was completely beyond the common sense of these people. Although they still had some doubts, looking at the information in front of them, most of them already believed it. This was also related to Li Anping's current absolute power and absolute power. How can this be? Unbelievable, such creatures actually exist. How strong are those demons? How should we deal with them? What's the so-called 9th energy level? Can we humans reach it? If Li Anping didn't unify the human world, and instead called all the leaders of the countries here, whether or not he would be able to do so was not a question. Even if all of them were here, whether or not they would believe him was a problem. If they believed him, how they would lead and who would listen to whom would be an even bigger problem. They definitely wouldn't be as relaxed as Li Anping was now. Everyone, the crisis of humanity is imminent. I need all of you to mobilize all of your forces. Li Anping's gaze was as heavy as 1,000 pounds. With a glance, no one dared to look him in the eye. It also completely suppressed the noise in the audience. At most, in 17 months, the worst-case scenario might be an 8th energy-level demon appearing on Earth. So from now on, although the ordinary people don't know, we will be completely in a state of war. Everything is for humanity. Li Anping's words obviously set off a huge wave in the hearts of the people. The contents of the summit meeting would probably be completely changed. This was also a time that Li Anping had specially chosen. The topics discussed before the announcement of the demons were all important and related to the most basic problems of every country. Li Anping looked at the topics after that. They weren't particularly urgent and could completely make way for the war. Therefore, Li Anping chose to let them discuss first, and directly prepare to deal with the demons after the discussion. When the people below the stage saw Li Anping finish speaking, they clearly had a lot of questions they wanted to ask. Judy Arnold was the first to stand up, asking the question that all level 5 ability users wanted to know. Your Majesty, I want to ask, the so-called 8th energy level and 9th energy level, what kind of power do they possess? As such, Li Anping told them what Hygram told him, and then added, Hygram doesn't know much about the 9th energy level. As for the 8th energy level, according to different abilities, destructive power, speed, and other aspects, there will be different. However, from what I understand regarding their undying nature, I fear that with humanity's current technological methods, it is impossible to kill them. As for the specific information, I will send you all later. Claudia, who represented Ice Fortress in the summit, stood up. Right now, she was wearing a black suit, her pink long hair tied up. Compared to before, she had a more capable aura. Your Majesty, can the world-crossing gate not be destroyed? Li Anping shook his head. No, the world-crossing gate is a unique product of the White Land. It is like a gravitational force, there is no option to destroy it. Unless one day I can modify the universe's parameters, there is no way to shut it down. Your Majesty. A white man stood up. Is there no possibility of peaceful coexistence? A race like the demons should be able to communicate, right? Li Anping gave him a look, and then said word by word, there is absolutely no such possibility. The White Land has many world-crossing gates, they can reach other places, not only our Earth. They have also encountered humans in other worlds. And for the demons, humans are existences similar to food. Moreover, for many demons, humans have the effect of increasing their power, just like the freaks that appeared in the Codex Nation and the Federation. Therefore, I will reiterate once again, there is absolutely no possibility of compromise between humans and demons, the option of surrender does not exist. Lianping coldly swept his eyes over the people below the stage, and then he began to answer another person's question. Time quietly passed by during this exchange of questions and answers. Meanwhile, as the representatives received information regarding the demons written by Lianping one after another, as well as questions answered by Lianping one after another, everyone felt the severity of the situation. However, the demons weren't right in front of them, so even though most of them felt danger, they didn't feel as if it was imminent, as if fire was burning in their eyebrows. Meanwhile, Lianping also requested that the relevant information could only be known by those present, all level 5 ability users, and the highest leaders of all countries. Information regarding the demons wasn't open to everyone for the time being. From this night onwards, whether they knew it or not, the entire human society was like a fully wound engine, starting to exert all of its horsepower in order to resist the unprecedented crisis. Chapter 356. Half a month after the Supreme Summit, on the frozen ocean in the northern part of the Lost State, the originally sunny weather suddenly changed. Dark clouds shrouded the sky, as if they would fall at any time. There was a unique sense of dread in the air, the feeling of an impending storm. A small fishing boat was drifting in the dark sea. The crew on the boat looked nervously at the increasingly dark sea outside the window, as well as the increasingly large waves. Damn, why is there a storm all of a sudden? It was fine just now. We can't go on like this, we can't escape, we can only resist. Just as the crew expressed their worries in twos and threes, a huge wave hit the boat, shaking the whole boat. The water droplets falling from the sky hit the deck of the small fishing boat like a waterfall, making crackling sounds. The storm had begun. Go back to the cabin. As soon as the captain shouted this sentence, the violent rainwater poured into his mouth. In the fury of the sea, the small fishing boat had no power to fight back. The crew could only hide in the cabin, quietly waiting for nature's judgment on them. In the cabin, some crew members prayed, "Lord, please forgive us." Some crew members began to complain about the captain. "I told you not to come, if the captain didn't insist on a long voyage, we wouldn't have encountered such a thing." More people were pale, sitting nervously in the cabin that was constantly being hit by the storm and shaking crazily, silently. At this moment, another huge wave hit the ship. With a loud bang, the ship let out a low and hoarse sound, as if it would break at any moment. In the end, the ship did not flip over and landed steadily on the surface of the sea. Just as all the crew members heaved a sigh of relief, another wave crashed into the ship. The huge force directly overturned the fishing ship without mercy. The entire ship crashed into the bottom of the sea upside down and kept sinking to the bottom. "Help! I don't want to die." The seawater poured into the cabin, washing the crew together like sardines. Just as they began to struggle in panic and despair, thinking that they were going to die, a soft bang came from the bottom of the boat. Then, the small fishing boat that had sunk into the sea slowly floated to the surface under the force of a push. The crew rushed to the deck as if they had been reborn, taking in large mouthfuls of fresh air. Then, he looked at the surrounding sky, not knowing what to do. The fishing boat was flying higher and higher, rising into the sky. "Oh my God! We're flying!" At the bottom of the fishing boat, the black psychic energy avatar lifted the entire fishing boat with both hands and continued to rise into the sky. The fishing boat broke through the dark clouds, reaching a height of tens of thousands of meters, and a huge floating fortress appeared in front of everyone. It was a war fortress built by the Federation Sky City. Ignoring the cries of surprise on the fishing boat, Lianping moved the small fishing boat into the helipad under Sky City. Soon after, it flew out again and plunged into the sea tens of thousands of meters below the surface of the sea. Ever since the summit meeting half a month ago, the entire human society had been pushed forward by Lianping. Warp gates were installed in every city, and controllable nuclear fusion reactors sent sufficient energy to the entire Western continent. After unifying the world, the Royal Academy of Sciences, as a research institute directly under Lianping, also received more resources. The best scientists of every country were summoned to the new Eastern Sun, where they would continue to digest the technology from the Divine King and even use it as a foundation to develop more weapons of war. And now, Sky City had come to the frozen ocean in the northern part of the Codex State in order to build a submarine base around the portal in the depths of the sea. This was because once the demons arrived, this place would be the first line of defense against them, and also a stronghold to monitor the situation of the portal. In the midst of a violent storm, the psychic energy avatar had already dug into the sea with a bang, bringing up a spray of water with it. Compared to the violent surface of the sea, the bottom of the sea looked much calmer. In the blink of an eye, Lianping had already dived more than 100 meters. The storm on the surface of the sea had no effect on this place at all, and colorful sea fishes swam freely in front of him. The psychic energy avatar suddenly began to dive again. As Lianping continued to dive deeper, the sunlight could no longer shine on the surface of the sea at this depth, and the surroundings began to gradually become dim. As he continued to dive deeper, the surrounding creatures gradually disappeared. As he dived deeper, the water pressure became higher and higher, and it was no longer a place where ordinary creatures could survive. When Lianping reached the bottom of the sea 10,000 meters, there were no longer any fish creatures around him. In this pitch-black sea there was nothing at all. The human eye could not sense any light source, nor could it see anything. There was only a terrifying silence that filled the boundless darkness. Loneliness, darkness, and despair. This was the feeling that the depths of the sea gave people. If it was someone else other than Lianping who appeared here, even if he had the strength of a psychic energy avatar, he would probably be tortured to madness by the darkness and loneliness in front of him. In this silent silence, a pitch-black shadow rushed towards Lianping. The shadow was like a deep-sea giant. Its huge body was more than 300 meters long, and it collided with Lianping, who was still at the bottom of the sea. With a loud bang, the shadow had already collided with Lianping. Then, like a snake, it coiled towards Lianping. If there was a searchlight at this time, it would be able to see that the shadow in front of him was a huge snake covered in white scales. Its body was almost as thick as an ordinary building. As for the specific size, just think of a building that was more than 100 stories tall. When Lianping saw a sea monster of this size, he was naturally not afraid at all. He only patted the sea monster's body and said, "All right, stop fooling around." The sea monster seemed to understand Lianping's meaning. It swung its tail and continued to dive into the depths of the sea with Lianping. This sea monster was actually a monster from New Dongyang. This time, for the construction of the underwater base in the frozen ocean, Lianping also brought it here. This giant monster that was enough to dominate the entire underwater world became as obedient as a puppy in front of Lianping. In the blink of an eye, the man and the monster had dived more than 2,000 meters again. The originally dark underwater world suddenly lit up with starry lights. The bottom of the sea, which should have been empty and filled with darkness and dead silence, was now filled with all kinds of construction machinery. There were also dozens of huge searchlights, which illuminated the entire bottom of the sea as if it was daytime. The giant snake sea monster had swam away again and went to patrol the nearby deep sea. Lianping looked at the construction site in front of him. The yellow construction robots were busy like bees. These construction robots were the latest underwater scouts developed by the Royal Academy of Sciences. Their bodies were made of newly developed steel alloys and theoretically could work at a depth of 50,000 meters. The first experiment had been successful at a depth of 20,000 meters. These construction robots were equipped with particle weapons and could move at a speed of 30 knots underwater. They could be remotely controlled by human beings. Right now, they were responsible for the construction of the underwater base. At the center of the large construction site, the blue portal floated quietly at the bottom of the sea. Sky City in the air was responsible for supporting the construction team on the surface of the sea. As for Lianping's psychic avatar, it was responsible for staying around the portal. First, it was to help the construction of the underwater base. Second, it was the most suitable person on Earth to guard this place. After all, ordinary aptitude users would be useless against the Demon Clan if they stayed here. Among the stronger rank 5 aptitude users, there didn't seem to be anyone suitable for underwater combat. Also, Lianping discovered that his psychic avatar had a pretty good advantage in underwater combat. The abundant hydrogen and oxygen atoms here could greatly increase his combat strength. If the battle went out of control, he could return to Lianping's side and shake off the enemy. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.